Chapter 1. I probably really transmigrated. Within the luxurious and exquisite carriage, Zhong Shou expressionlessly looked at the round mirror in front of him. The image in the mirror was that of an underage teen. He was around 13 years old, his face was pale white, but his facial features were handsome and exquisite. A pair of long and narrow phoenix eyes were filled with light. However, at this moment, he felt bitter and helpless. He remembered that not long ago, he had an extremely ordinary face, the kind that could not be found in a crowd. He was a librarian in the library of a small country in the cloud world, eating and waiting for death. His identity couldn't be more ordinary. Who knew that when he woke up, his body would change into such a handsome man? Although he was slightly sickly and weak, he was undoubtedly top-class handsome. Even in his last life, those top male stars who were famous for their handsomeness couldn't compare to him. If there was something he was lacking, it would be his aura. However, at this moment, Zhong Shou didn't feel any joy. Instead, he felt bitter and helpless. It was like a fish that was originally free and living in the ocean suddenly came to the surface. Everything around him, apart from the strangeness, there was also a sense of fear and loneliness. Unwilling to give up, Zhong Shou used strength to pinch his face. Instantly, he felt a wave of pain. Naturally, he didn't notice any signs of plastic surgery on his face. I can feel pain, so I shouldn't be dreaming? But what is my identity now? Also, where is this damned place? Zhong Shou was the name in the memory of his current body. In his last life, he had another name. However, in this situation, it had no meaning to him. Muttering to himself, Zhong Shou sighed and looked away. His chest was filled with despair. He had already given up on returning or waking up from the dream. Actually, he had already changed into this body for a few days. Pretty much every time he woke up, he would repeat the actions from before. Today was already the 7th day. Looking at the decoration style of the carriage, it seemed to be from ancient times, but it was also not. When he lifted the curtains again, he saw a vast expanse of wilderness outside. It stretched as far as the eye could see and was filled with lush greenery. It made his heart feel at ease. The air was also fresh and comfortable, without the slightest bit of the turbidity of his era. If one were to look down, they would discover that although the carriage had wheels, it was floating in the air 3 feet above the ground. The 16 wildebeests with horns on their foreheads were also walking in the air and could move up and down. Therefore, although the carriage was huge, just the carriage itself was 40 square meters, no matter what kind of complicated terrain it was, it could still travel as if it was flat ground. At this moment, there was no one in front of them. They rushed forward in a straight line, flying into the distance. The knife marks and sword wounds on the sides of the carriage also made one pay attention to them. Zhong Shou felt a wave of dizziness as he collapsed onto the velvet mattress. The horse was a tamed elite beast and the carriage was the cloud-crossing carriage. Based on what he knew, these 2 items only appeared 12,000 years ago in the cloud world, so they should be antiques from a long time ago. Then, with a slight thought, a series of memories appeared in his mind. They were all fragmented and incomplete. There were many words and many human faces. Sometimes he was practicing martial arts, sometimes he was reading books. He saw life and death battles and also saw people flying into the sky and burrowing into the ground. There was also a towering giant mountain that pierced into the clouds. An unbelievably huge academy that took up half of the island in the middle of the lake. It felt strange yet familiar at the same time, and it also gave him a sense of dread. Such a feeling was really complicated and weird. Lastly, there was a part of memory that was still perfectly preserved in the deepest part of his brain. There were numerous mysterious words that were combined together to form a complete book. He was really familiar with these words, even knowing them like the back of his hand. When he was still a student, he did a lot of research and even published a thesis. Indefinite Spirit Emperor Art and These Demon Words. Was this place really 10,000 years ago when martial cultivators and spirit masters ruled? These characteristics in my memory shouldn't be wrong. Thinking back to the academy in his incomplete memory, the incantations that the spirit masters used every day, as well as the various spiritual energy. Zhong Shou's lips couldn't help but twitch, his face was filled with shock. It wasn't that he hadn't seen similar scenes before, but that was in the game. In the future, the cloud world prohibited private battles. Along with the low spiritual energy, only some special regions known as shrines had thicker spiritual energy. Martial arts and incantations started to decline. Along with the appearance of various machines, technology started to flourish. However, the people of the cloud world had passed down their ancestors who fought against the heavens and earth, developing a strong and courageous personality. Unable to cultivate normally, they could only seek solace in the virtual game world. Among them, the most famous was a virtual holographic online game called God Emperor. It was said that it invited all the martial arts experts of the current generation, as well as hundreds of historians. It completely recreated 13,000 years ago, before the God Emperor came to the world, the era where heroes were born. Martial arts and incantations, basic necessities, everything was close to the real world. That's right, he remembered that in his last life, his last consciousness was within the God Emperor game. The 7 emperors of the cloud world were fighting. One man and one sword, fighting all of them alone. However, at the last moment, an electric current passed through his body, causing him to lose all consciousness. When he woke up, he had a new body. Everything in front of him wasn't that familiar world. Then, was he in the game or was he in a real era 13,000 years ago? His head felt dizzy once more. Zhong Shou decided to put down everything, not thinking about it anymore. Anyways, he had nothing to do in this carriage. Zhong Shou took out a roughly 3 feet long green steel sword and started to practice his sword techniques in this relatively spacious carriage. His feet moved forward and backward, along with his body, causing the sword light to shine in this average-sized carriage. Just like in his previous life, every sword move and every step was precise to the pinnacle. It could be said to be perfect. However, after just a few minutes of practicing this basic sword technique, Zhong Shou was already panting, his entire body covered in cold sweat. That sword-light figure couldn't help but change shape. Only by relying on his innate determination to never admit defeat, he held on and didn't fall to the ground. Until the remaining strength in his body was used up. Only then did Zhong Shou stop his sword light, panting as he sat on the couch. When his extremely focused attention was finally scattered. Instantly, he could feel his bones, tendons, limbs, lungs, and all other parts of his body were burning with pain. This action wasn't just because he was bored, but because he was uneasy. This world, as well as his own situation, made him feel a sense of crisis and urgency. He couldn't wait to obtain some strength, at least some ability to protect his life. In his last life, for that game, he studied all the martial artist foundations to the Grandmaster realm. In the entire cloud world, there were only 1,000 people who had such achievement. The sword theories and changes within were all grasped. What he needed to do now was to let this body remember, and make it his instinct. However, his body was just too weak. It was just a normal level of training, but he could only last for 10 minutes. His stamina wasn't even half of a normal person's. What was more depressing was that he couldn't cultivate the basic internal cultivation. It wasn't that Zhong Shou's body was really weak. Actually, in terms of strength, agility, and the like, he was a level higher than normal people. Even his bone structure and 5-element spiritual roots should belong to the top of geniuses. However, for some reason, his stamina was exceptionally weak. However, during these 7 days of searching, Zhong Shou had some ideas. It should be because of the bloodline in his body. As a half-monster, half-human and half-fox, he had such a handsome face. It also caused his body to be so weak. If it was as he expected, be it his father's or mother's race, they should have an extraordinary background. I still don't know the characteristics of this human race bloodline. However, this monster race bloodline is obviously that of a seven-tailed sky fox. In the entire cloud world, there are less than 100 people who have this bloodline. If one side could suppress the other, then it would be okay. However, they are at a stalemate. In this cloud world, no matter which era, pretty much everyone learns martial arts. Even a teen who hasn't reached adulthood can open up a meridian. Even an unremarkable commoner would often have a body of extraordinary martial arts. My body has no internal strength at all, and I don't even have the strength to truss up a chicken. It is really rare. Lying on the soft mattress, Zhong Shou's thoughts that he forcefully suppressed once again surged up. He subconsciously thought back to those mysterious demon words in the depths of his memory. In his memory, this indefinite spirit emperor art was accompanied by a set of indefinite killing fist and a set of fish dragon wind and cloud changing technique. They were all top martial arts technique. As for this indefinite spirit emperor, Zhong Shou felt like he had heard of it before. However, he couldn't think of where it came from. Top-grade top martial arts actually accompanied by a set of fist techniques and a set of movement technique. To have two types of high-grade bloodlines, his identity definitely isn't a normal person. He is probably the descendant of some noble family in the cloud world. Was this Zhong Shou a disciple of an aristocratic family? Zhong's surname? He came from the Sky Fox Zhong family whose entire family was wiped out? For some reason, this name was really familiar. Alright, there are also those two servants. Thinking back to the two people who had traveled together for 7 days but had temporarily left, Zhong Shou couldn't help but feel dizzy. Based on how extraordinary those two people were, it was likely that his status was far beyond his imagination. Thinking back to how the world in the game had become reality, Zhong Shou felt that it was unbelievable that he was in such a situation. Just as he was having a headache, a whistling sound spread out from outside the carriage. Zhong Shou's brows furrowed as he turned around and looked out of the window, only to see a girl in a colorful dress flying over. Although she was walking, her galloping speed was actually a little faster than those 16 wildebeests. In her slender hands there was a huge beast carcass. Seeing Zhong Shou look over, the girl instantly raised her head and smiled sweetly. She was really pretty, her brows like a painting. Behind her ears was a pair of cute white cat ears. She was one of the two servants he had after he woke up in this world, Chu Shui. Behind him, there was a burly man following behind him. He was the coachman of the carriage. His name was Yin Yang. He was 9 feet tall, his body was muscular like he was made of steel. He gave off a majestic aura. His footsteps weren't fast or slow, but each step he took could cross dozens of feet. His squarish face was as calm as water, hiding a hint of worry. Chapter 2. The thick fragrance of meat spread throughout the wilderness. A terrifyingly huge beast leg was being pierced by a steel spear. It was being barbecued on the fire. Occasionally, oil would drip down, giving out sizzling sound. Seeing that the pig skin had already turned golden yellow, Zhong Shou carefully brushed a layer of sesame oil and added some spices. This made the fragrance of the meat even more tempting. The wild-toothed boar, which weighed 4 tons, was split into several portions. At least half of it was fed to the horned horses beside it, which were also known as cloud-stepping foals. Mixed with soybeans and grass, they were eating happily. Only 3 pig legs were left. Apart from one of them being barbecued, Yin Yang and Chu Shui both took one each, eating until their mouths were covered in oil. The former was slightly more refined, while the latter didn't care about her image at all. It was like she wanted to swallow the bones into her stomach. As she chewed, she looked at Zhong Shou with worshipful eyes. So fragrant! Gulp! So delicious! Little Master's barbecuing skills are much better than before. Her voice was muffled. If one didn't pay attention, one wouldn't be able to hear it clearly. Zhong Shou couldn't help but smile. Chu Shui was his maidservant. She was born in the tiger cat race, which was a branch of the monster race. Although she looked beautiful, she was a glutton and active person. She looked quiet and elegant, like a lady from a big family. However, she couldn't stay still for even a moment. Especially when she was eating, it would always make one's jaw drop. Although her name was Chu Shui, apart from her skin, which was white as snow, her temperament and personality didn't match her name at all. The so-called monster race, according to later records, was an ancient race that fought against the savage beasts of the other races. They merged the blood of some strong beasts into their bodies to increase their combat strength. However, when that tragic era ended, these people were afraid of humans and decided to form their own race, which was the origin of the monster race. 10,000 years later, this race was nearly extinct. Zhong Shou had only seen them in games. He casually cut off a piece of roasted meat with the dagger in his hand and ate it slowly. Then, Zhong Shou's gaze inadvertently landed on the carriage beside him. Uncle Ian, the enemy is still watching us from the sidelines. Isn't it a little inappropriate for us to start a fire and stop here? After staying in the carriage for 7 days, Zhong Shou didn't see Yin Yang and Chu Shui fight with their own eyes. However, the wounds on the sides of the carriage were new. There were also numerous holes which nearly pierced through the iron board of the room. Some places were even stained with blood. It was a ghastly sight. It could be seen that he must have experienced some dangers before coming to this world. Over the past 2 days, the two of them would occasionally leave the area, claiming that they were out hunting. However, every time they returned, there would always be a thick stench of blood on their bodies. It was not the blood of beasts, but the blood of humans. Yin Yang was startled when he heard that. Following which, he didn't care at all, continuing to eat. His voice was dark and cold as he said, "Prince, don't worry, the area within 600 miles has been cleared out. However, there are hawks in the sky following us day and night. It doesn't matter if we start a fire or not. Chu Shui and I need some time to rest up." Zhong Shou raised his head and looked up. As expected, he saw a few small black dots passing through the clouds. His heart instantly sank once more. With these eyes in the sky, the enemy knew where they were like the back of their hand. Moreover, with how conspicuous this carriage was, it was impossible to hide its tracks. It seemed like there was a huge enemy nearby, and it was really dangerous. However, what he cared about more was how Yin Yang called him. Chu Shui called him young master, but Yin Yang called him prince. Prince, within the monster race, he was definitely the heir of the monster king. There were hundreds of branches in the monster race, and most of them were arrogant and untamed. As the heir of the monster king, he didn't even have the strength to fight a chicken. One could imagine what kind of outcome he would face. Sighing, Zhong Shou continued to eat the wild boar tooth meat in his hand. When he was about 90% full, he felt a warm flow of air moving around in his body. Zhong Shou straightened his body and walked to the side, choosing a more spacious area. He started to move his body, suddenly bending his waist, suddenly bending his body, suddenly stretching out his limbs. It was similar to the weight loss exercises that were popular in the future. Chu Shui had also finished the pig leg in her hand, but she tore off half of the roasted front leg. While eating, she looked over curiously. Training these positions again, it looks so weird. You can't fight with others. Young master, did you learn this from Linhai College? Those spirit masters only know how to lie. They even said that they don't discriminate in education and accept the world. Zhong Shou acted like he didn't hear anything. He was really focused, trying his best to complete each movement in the most perfect way possible. Basic energy leading wasn't a legacy from ancient times. It was created by some players in the God Emperor game. The goal was to guide the energy absorbed from the outside world into one's own. Along with internal breathing techniques, it was really beneficial, especially when cultivating basic cultivation techniques. It could raise the efficiency by at least 30%. Zhong Shou was one of the participants and founders. Before he came here, he was already researching the 7th set of movements. Unfortunately, before he could complete it, the Book of Ian Extreme Life was born, causing the battle of the 7 emperors of the Cloud World. After that, he inexplicably came to this world. At this moment, every time Zhong Shou completed a movement, there would be a thread of energy that he would forcefully guide into the energy ocean in his lower abdomen. However, this energy wasn't true internal strength, but the so-called essence energy, gathered from the purest spiritual energy. The energy absorbed from the wild boar tooth meat should have dissipated as time went on. However, at this moment, Zhong Shou's energy-leading technique was forcefully gathering it into his dantian. It could strengthen the body, turn into internal energy, heal injuries, and pass it to others. It had many uses. In the last life, the reason why Zhong Shou was able to suppress hundreds of millions of players was because of this energy-leading technique. Usually, Zhong Shou would train in the carriage 3 times a day. Chu Shui had seen it before, but after a short moment, she wasn't interested. This was the first time Yin Yang saw it. After just one look, a bright glow appeared in his eyes, and he couldn't take his eyes off it. Until Zhong Shou completed the entire set of energy-leading technique. Only then did the sharp glow in Yin Yang's eyes retract. He said expressionlessly, "Where did the prince learn this set of movements from? If you train hard, even if you can't become a hero, you can strengthen your body." Zhong Shou nodded slightly to show that he understood, but a weird expression flashed across his face. During these 7 days, the only thing he knew was that he had studied in the familiar Linhai College for a long time. Only recently did the 2 of them bring him out. And then there was Yin Yang. Even with his knowledge and experience, he couldn't see through Yin Yang. He was calm and steady, and his actions were proper. No matter how he looked at him, he didn't look like a coachman. After finishing the pork, Yin Yang and Chu Shui both entered a meditative state to adjust their breathing. Their breathing slowly calmed down, like they had fallen asleep. Zhong Shou also sat down cross-legged. He first tried to circulate a basic heart technique, turning the essence energy in his energy ocean into internal energy. At the start, he didn't feel anything, but when the energy entered his meridians, he felt a piercing pain. Like 100,000 needles were stabbing into his body at the same time, causing him to cry out in pain. Zhong Shou instinctively sucked in a cold breath. He didn't want to disturb the 2 people beside him, so he forcefully bore with the pain. Only after a short while did the pain slightly stop. His front and back were covered in cold sweat. As expected, it is because the meridians are connected. A look of understanding flashed across his eyes. Zhong Shou used his mind to make the threads of warm energy return to his energy ocean. He had temporarily given up on the thought of continuing to cultivate internal energy. All the races in the cloud world used the 9 chakra meridians as their foundations. The 9 chakra meridians wrapped around the body. Just now, when Zhong Shou was circulating his energy, he could feel that the essence energy had split up within his meridians. Within his body, as he had expected, there were 2 meridians coexisting. This body was a half-monster, having the blood of both the human race and the fox race. Both of them had a special background, and he had the strengths of both races. His bones and 5-element spiritual roots were definitely not ordinary. However, because of this, the 2 clashed, causing his stamina to be shockingly low. This caused him to be unable to cultivate any internal energy normally. If it was other people with such a dual meridian body type, they would have most likely given up on cultivating. However, to him, it wasn't that he had no hope. Coming to this world, what he was most thankful for was the tens of years of reading in his last life. Through the verification in the virtual world, he had accumulated far more experience than any other martial artist in this era. Recalling the information from his last life, Zhong Shou's brows slowly furrowed tightly. Either he cultivated a special cultivation method that was suitable for dual meridians. In Zhong Shou's memory there were many types. Moreover, they all said that power was extraordinary, at least above the pinnacle, but they weren't suitable. Next, it was to obtain a few heavenly treasures, to strengthen one of his bloodlines and suppress the other, to change his body type and merge the two meridians into one. However, these heavenly treasures were even rarer. Zhong Shou didn't even think about it. Serves me right. Blazing cold flame technique, great reverse Luo God technique, sun and moon brilliant wheel. When I snatched them, why didn't I take a close look? Although they are a little trash. Just as he was feeling frustrated, a light flashed in his mind, and another paragraph of words flashed across his mind. The path of the heavens is to take away what is surplus and make up for what is lacking. The path of man is to sacrifice what's not enough and give what's not enough. Zhong Shou was startled. In the next moment, like he had seen a snake, he hurriedly chased these memories out of his mind, burying them deep in his memory. These words came from an ancient martial arts secret that he had obtained by chance in his early years. It was called vitality devouring. It had once caused endless waves in the cloud world, causing numerous blood storms. Its name spread far and wide, and was seen as a taboo by people. If this technique was used, it could solve the problem of his bloodline conflict and even allow his cultivation to explode. However, unless he had no choice and was facing death, he wasn't willing to touch this method. Especially with his dual meridian body, it would cause more problems. At this moment, he was still hesitating. Sighing bitterly, Zhong Shou spread all the essence energy that he had gathered into his limbs and bones to strengthen his body. Especially his hands, causing his muscles to become firmer and his bones and tendons to become tougher. Following which, he chopped down a piece of common iron wood from the forest not far away. Using the fine steel treasure sword in his hand, he carved it into 1/2 foot-long wooden flying knives. Chapter 3. Standing beside the carriage window, Zhong Shou raised his wrist, and a black light shot out from his sleeve. In an instant it was 200 feet away from the carriage, pinned onto a small tree, giving out a soft thud. 1/2 centimeter to the left. Since there was someone driving the carriage, the speed of the cloud-crossing carriage increased by several times. The small tree that was used as a target flashed across their field of vision, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Zhong Shou squinted his eyes, his sharp eyes like that of an eagle. He could clearly see that the flying knife that he made out of ironwood was slightly slanted to the left. Since that day when they stopped to rest, another 3 days had passed, and they didn't stop to rest. Yin Yang and Chu Shui would occasionally leave the carriage with killing intent. As for Zhong Shou, he continued to have nothing to do, staying in the carriage. Apart from practicing sword techniques and body techniques, using the guiding technique to gather spiritual energy from all around to strengthen his body. He had one more thing to do, which was to use these black ironwood flying knives to practice. Every time his body was tired, Zhong Shou would stand in front of the window, using anything nearby as a target to shoot out the flying knife. In the last life, Zhong Shou was famous for his sword, entering the God Emperor game. Within the 7 emperors of the cloud world, even in the millions of worlds, he was the top expert among the players. However, at that time, his most terrifying move was the flying knife hidden weapon, which also suppressed everyone. The 6 gods' defensive knife technique was learned in the God Emperor game. When the knife was thrown out, it never missed, and its strength could slay celestials. Even in the battle of the 7 emperors, he had never failed. Even the person who was known as the Shadowless Emperor, who was the best in the world in terms of movement techniques, also fell under his 6 Gods defensive knife technique. The most special thing about this virtual game was that most of the martial techniques and secret techniques that could be learned had detailed training methods, which came from ancient legacies. He could also practice it in the real world. The 6 Gods defensive knife technique was one of the top secret techniques. Although Zhong Shou had yet to open his arterial chakra meridians, he was already able to practice some of the secret technique. This allowed his flying knife technique to not lose out to a true martial artist, or even surpass them. Zhong Shou flipped his right hand again, and another black flying dagger made of ironwood appeared in his hand. Along with the movement of his fingers, the saber rolled up and down between his fingers, bringing out a series of extremely beautiful saber shadows. Zhong Shou, on the other hand, closed his eyes slightly and began to examine his own body. Without cultivating internal breathing, one would have no idea about the state of the chakra meridians in one's body. It was basically impossible for one to truly pry into the meridians of one's body. However, with the experience of being a top martial artist in his previous life, he could clearly feel the changes in the condition of every muscle in his arm, the amount of strength, the degree of strength and flexibility. Even the expansion and contraction of the tendons and the twisting of the joints could be clearly seen in the chest. In a short while, Zhong Shou understood something. In 3 days, this flying knife had gone from rusty to practiced. Now, he could even hit a moving target with 100% accuracy. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to do it. Even those who were really talented in martial arts wouldn't be able to do it. He was the only one who could reach such a level step by relying on his precise control, as well as his constant self-reflection and adjustments. However, Zhong Shou wasn't satisfied with that knife just now. In the art of hidden weapons, the slightest difference would result in a huge difference. And in a fight between martial artists, life and death were often on the line, and one couldn't afford to make any mistake. Even if it was off by half a centimeter, in his eyes, it was still unbearable. The carriage continued to speed through the wilderness. Suddenly, a running fire feather rabbit jumped into Zhong Shou's line of sight. His pupils slightly widened, and the wooden flying dagger in his right hand shot out almost instinctively. It turned into a streak of black light that traveled more than 30 meters and pierced towards the fire-feathered rabbit's throat. And in Zhong Shou's vision, a ball of blood spurted out at almost the same time. That flying knife pierced a huge hole in the throat of the fire-feather rabbit without any suspense. The fire-feather rabbit also fell to the ground, rolling on the ground. Looking carefully, one could see that the flying knife was still off by a little. However, this was due to the target's high-speed dodging. It was within his expectations and within his expectations. Smiling slightly, Zhong Shou took out another flying knife. At this moment, he had barely found the feeling of never missing a target from his previous life. What he needed to do after this was like basic sword techniques, basic movement techniques, and other martial arts foundations. He had to continue practicing knife by knife, practicing his strength from all angles. He had to completely engrave this flying knife technique into the deepest part of his blood, flesh, and bone marrow, turning it into an instinct. Although this body's stamina is weak, however, its strength and flexibility are really terrifying. Today, I only have half the bloodline of the monster race. No wonder the monster race isn't tolerated by humans. Chu Shui's huge strength as well as that extremely swift land galloping technique. It wasn't just because of the martial arts that she cultivated. At least 30% of it was because of her talent as a snowcat race. His muscles tightened, his strength focused on the tip of the knife. Just as that black knife light broke through the air from within the carriage window, Zhong Shou's heart moved. When he turned around, he saw Chu Shui standing at the door of the carriage. Her hands were holding a giant bathtub, her blue eyes were stunned as she looked at Zhong Shou's right hand. After a short while, she was slightly distracted. How quick! Little Master's knife, Even Shui might not be able to block it. Following which her almond eyes shone brightly. This flying knife technique seems like it's just the basics. However, it's really amazing. Oh, it's really smooth, clean and simple. Did the ruler teach it? However, young master is even more amazing. It's so unfamiliar and stiff, like it's a beginner. Looking closely, it seems like it has been trained thousands of times and has reached perfection. Just now, Uncle Ian also said that young master is a true genius. Unfortunately, like she knew that she had said something wrong, Chu Shui hurriedly stopped. Samurai couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. He didn't plan to hide the fact that he trained in sword techniques and flying knives from the two of them. In the broken memory scenes, there were memories of him training in martial arts when he was young. Be it fist techniques, sword techniques, hidden weapons, or 18 types of weapons, they were all involved. Although it was just the basics, they all had extraordinary legacies and could be said to have obtained the essence of the martial path. Within Linhai College, apart from writing, chanting, and spiritual techniques, they also taught martial art. However, after 10 years, most probably due to Zhong Shou being unable to open up his meridians, he didn't train anymore. This was why no matter what he trained in now, it wouldn't attract any suspicion. What shocked him was the comprehension of this young girl. With just one look, he was able to see through the profoundness of his saber. Simple, efficient, and quick, removing all unnecessary movement. While maintaining precision, she used all her strength to the best of her ability. This was the basic mysteries of the six-god defensive knife technique. As for the flying knife technique, he had trained it thousands of times. However, his body was also really unfamiliar with it. How could such a girl be the maid of a person who had no fighting ability at all? Secretly shocked, Zhong Shou didn't show it on his face. He expressionlessly looked at the ironwood flying knife outside the window. No matter how well I train in this flying knife, what's the use? If I can't cultivate energy techniques, I'm just a piece of trash. These words weren't just for show. He really felt helpless. In his mind, there were scenes of him training. Naturally, there were also numerous white eyes and disdain. This was enough to make Zhong Shou feel wronged. Although it wasn't his own memories, he felt the same way. He wished that he could return to his last life and use this body to sweep through the crowd. Mocking himself, he looked at Chu Shui's expression and felt more nervous and ashamed. Zhong Shou shook his head and didn't speak. Turning around, he looked at the wooden tub in her hand, his face filled with doubt. What is this for? Chu Shui was originally blaming herself. When she heard those words, it was like she had received amnesty. She anxiously placed down the tub while explaining, "Young master, did you forget? Today is the day of the 10-day medicinal bath. Shui is here to help you wash up." Wash up? Zhong Shou's heart shook. At that moment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Looking at the wooden tub, it was filled with all sorts of medicinal herbs. Chu Shui's jade-like hands smacked the side of the tub. In the blink of an eye, countless amounts of water from all directions were gathered by an unknown force and gathered into the wooden barrel. It slowly heated up, and in the blink of an eye, it was boiling. At this moment, Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with shock. This is dual cultivation. Chapter 4. Relaxing his brows, Zhong Shou once again adjusted his breathing. Sitting in the tub, he continued to guide the medicinal power in his body, turning it into spiritual energy and filling every corner of his organs. What he was using now was the internal breathing Daoyin technique, which was one of the branches of the Daoyin technique. Without the corresponding movements and postures, it was naturally impossible for him to make full use of every wisp of spiritual energy like the latter. Chu Shui's pulse-touching massage technique was obviously a top-secret technique. With her true qi as a support, the speed of refining the medicinal power was hundreds of times faster than his Daoyin technique. However, in terms of meticulousness, it was far inferior. At this moment, Zhong Shou was converting the medicinal power in his body that had yet to be refined into spiritual energy. He didn't expect these medicines to be able to cure his dual meridian body, nor was he willing to strengthen his bloodline and worsen the root of the problem. He could only try his best to strengthen his body. He really couldn't bear to waste the essence of the medicinal power. In just half the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Zhong Shou had washed his limbs, bones, and pretty much every corner of his body. Only when the swelling pain in his meridians was unbearable did he stop. Although this medicinal bath could strengthen the body and strengthen the vital energy, it needed to be done step by step and slowly improve. It couldn't be rushed. Once every 10 days was the most appropriate buffer. However, when Zhong Shou opened his eyes once more, he looked at the medicinal liquid around him that still had a thick medicinal smell. He sighed once more. In his heart, he was really doubtful about whether or not that so-called famous doctor understood medicine. The medicinal formula of this 5 ginseng blood-strengthening soup could be said to be luxurious. All the ingredients used were rare and expensive. However, the medicinal power that could be absorbed by the human body was less than 10%. If he was the one making the medicine, the medicinal effect would be at least 3 times stronger. If his body was fine and didn't have the dual meridian problem, he could even use the strength of the medicine to open up a chakra meridian and step onto the path of martial cultivation. Unfortunately, I can't even do normal internal energy breathing exercises. I can't use internal energy in my meridians. If it was just pain, it would be okay. However, I am afraid that the energy will clash with the dual meridians, and I might even die. Is there really no other way? After pondering for a long time, Zhong Shou got up from the bathtub. Just as he stood up, another passage of scripture appeared in his mind. It wasn't a demon script, but an ancient talisman. Observing the Tao of the heavens, knowing the actions of the heavens, the Tao of the heavens is constant, never to return. Whether or not there is peace in a month, there are different forms of use. A moment of good luck can be turned into a misfortune, and a moment of misfortune can be turned into a use. Why is it the energy-devouring technique again? Zhong Shou's eyes suddenly widened and his body froze. He could be said to be extremely familiar with these words. It came from the heaven-devouring energy conversion scripture. There were no martial arts recorded in it, only some profound scriptures and martial arts secret. For some reason, this heretical book, which should have been banned by the holy lands of the Zhou clan, had spread to a very small circle in the Divine Emperor game. As a result, millions of players were killed or injured in 3 years. Zhong Shou had coincidentally obtained a copy of the heaven-devouring energy conversion scripture. He didn't dare to rashly cultivate it and had been searching for ways to improve it. However, he didn't gain much from it. He could only borrow a portion of its essence and merge it into other martial arts. As time passed, he gave up on the idea of relying on this scripture to create his own martial arts. However, during these few days, who knows if it was because he had lost all hope in his current situation, but Zhong Shou would occasionally think about this scripture and couldn't help himself. The Tao of the heavens is to take away what is surplus and make up for what is lacking. Right now, my dual meridians are running parallel to each other, my body is weak and my chi is weak. If I cultivate this technique, I can be like that person, stepping on the clouds and reaching the heavens in one step. The essence of the heaven-devouring energy conversion scripture was to steal the essence of others for one's own use, to swallow the essence of the heavens and earth to improve one's body. Stealing by force was something that all martial cultivators and spirit masters hated. However, Zhong Shou didn't feel any burden towards this. If a tool was used well, it would be good. If it was used badly, it would be evil. Towards life and death enemies, one had to be unscrupulous. Naturally, Zhong Shou wouldn't casually steal the essence energy of those innocent people. Stepping on the clouds and reaching the heavens in one step? That sounds nice. Although that person ruled for a period of time, what happened in the end? In just a short 3 years, his body broke apart and he died. Rather than saying that he fell to the combined attacks of those few top experts, it was better to say that he died in his own hands. Cultivating this method, how do you adjust your meridians and how do you merge with those different types of essence? It looks like a shortcut, but it is actually a path of death. If your true chi is too impure, it will be tough for you to break away from your body and step onto the celestial martial path. You spent so much effort these few years to gather so many people to create your own energy leading technique. Wasn't it to prepare for this technique? Adjusting the meridians and swallowing essence energy isn't impossible. Moreover, this energy swallowing technique has been improved by a lot. Although power has fallen, there is no danger of his internal energy going berserk. However, this energy leading technique still isn't complete. The heaven swallowing energy conversion scripture still has flaws. Moreover, this dual meridian body can't be improved. Cultivating this method will only be like this 5 ginseng bone strengthening soup. The two voices in his head argued. Zhong Shou's face was dark and sunny, changing constantly. After a short while, Zhong Shou smiled and sat down once more. His heart was extremely clear, saving his life was the most important thing. If time allowed, he naturally wanted to perfect it before cultivating this heaven-swallowing energy conversion scripture. However, what choice did he have now? Chu Shui and Yin Yang all said that he didn't need to worry, but it made him feel even more uneasy. If something unexpected happened, he had to have some ability to protect himself. Moreover, if he only used it to absorb the essence of these herbs, this energy swallowing technique shouldn't cause any problems. With a decision in his heart, Zhong Shou directly started to breathe in and out. He had studied this heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique numerous times and had also tried to simulate various situations. At this moment, when he used the technique, there were no obstructions at all. He was familiar with the process and led the medicinal energy into his body. This step was known as heaven swallowing, following which, he used the internal breathing leading technique to control the warm energy in his body and turn it into essence energy and spiritual energy. Then, he bore with the pain and followed the Heart Sutra to cause it to circulate, step by step compressing and purifying. This was the second step, energy conversion. It sounded simple, but the process was extremely complicated. If there was a slight mistake, all his efforts would be wasted. When he absorbed 70% of the medicinal liquid in the tub, Zhong Shou only felt like his stomach was about to explode. It was like many rats were uncontrollably running about in his body. His entire body was covered in cold sweat, and all his chakra meridians felt like they were about to break apart. Zhong Shou wasn't shocked but delighted. His expression was solemn, and his eyes shone brightly. He opened his mouth and shouted, "Open!" He forcefully controlled the essence energy and spiritual energy that he had refined so many times to strike half an inch below his navel. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach and a loud explosion in his ear. His vital energy suddenly flowed in the opposite direction and he lost consciousness, feeling dizzy. When Zhong Shou regained consciousness, joy appeared on his face. Chapter 5. It was different from a few days ago when no matter how he tried to sense his body, he could only feel a rough sense of energy. When Zhong Shou looked into his body once more, he could clearly feel the endless flow of energy, as well as the complicated and vast chakra meridians that followed the principles of heaven and earth. When the intense pain gradually subsided, a warm feeling rose in his chest and abdomen. This was where all spiritual energy, true essence, and internal energy gathered, the source of all energy. It was also where the 9 chakra meridians started. Before breaking through the chakra meridians, one could directly come into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Not long ago, although Zhong Shou could use a special method to sense this place, he was far from being able to sense it accurately. The spiritual energy that he spent so much effort to guide into his body was also unable to be stored within. Even if he forced it in, it would only slowly dissipate. At this moment, Zhong Shou's spiritual sense could see that there was an additional white ball of energy below his abdomen. If he went deeper in, he could see a white mist ocean in front of his eyes. A ball of energy flowed within. At first glance, it was a snow-white color, but upon closer inspection, he could see a portion of gray-blue dots within. These were the remaining essence energy that he had purified from the essence of the 5 ginseng blood strengthening soup using the energy swallowing technique. He just needed to slightly transform it and it could be turned into internal energy. The amount within was naturally not worth mentioning compared to when he ruled the cloud world in his last life. It was like the difference between an ocean and a pond. However, it made Zhong Shou feel like his heart was opened up, and all the pressure he felt was gone. The opening of the energy ocean is the beginning of the chakra meridians. In the game in his last life, Zhong Shou had created numerous characters to study the mysteries of the chakra meridians. He made use of the virtual environment to test out his new ideas, to test the so-called self-created martial arts that he had randomly pieced together. As for this energy ocean, he had naturally opened it numerous times. However, this was the first time he had opened it in reality, and the feeling it gave him was totally different. It wasn't a character in the game, but a real power that belonged to him. This was the beginning of all meridians. Only after the meridians were opened could one be considered to have truly stepped into the threshold of martial arts and had the qualifications to practice various martial arts. However, although this heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique is magical, it is still extremely powerful. However, no matter how purified the essence energy was, there would still be some impurities. Just as I expected, Zhong Shouxin's joy faded a little when he thought of the colorful dust particles in the white gas cloud. Those impurities were not that obvious at the moment. However, if he ignored it, once his cultivation reached the level where he could open his meridians and accumulate a certain amount, it would be fatal. Of course, there was nothing to worry about at the moment. After absorbing the strengths of dozens of top-notch martial arts and modifying the heaven-devouring energy conversion scripture, there were still some effects. With his self-created guiding technique, he would be able to completely purify it in less than a month. However, he still had to be careful in the future. He then tried to use the internal vision technique to check his chakra meridians. He felt that where the energy ocean was connected, the dozens of meridians and acupoints were all connected by dual meridians. They were like fried dough twists intertwined with each other. They repelled one another, but there were also many that were connected. Zhong Shou smiled helplessly, not bothering about the situation in his body. Instead, he started to sense the outside world. Before the energy ocean was opened, he was pretty much unable to sense the spiritual energy that spread between heaven and earth. Only now could he use his minuscule amount of energy to check out the situation within an inch of his body. However, in the next moment, Zhong Shou was startled once more. His brows furrowed once more. Why is the spiritual energy here also so thin? Calculating the spiritual energy density within an inch of his body, it was naturally much stronger than the future he was in. However, compared to the virtual and vast spiritual energy in the God Emperor game, it couldn't be compared. What era is this? Is it really 13,000 years ago? His eyes were lost as he looked around. At this moment, Zhong Shou felt regret that he had never felt before. In the God Emperor world, the top spirit masters and martial cultivators all had the ability to take over bodies. He had always been worried about this matter, which was why he didn't dare to directly ask Yin Yang and Chu Shui about it. During these few days, he could only try to probe. However, now he was really eager to understand his own situation, the situation of the cloud world, and the era he was in. Legend had it that at the end of the desolate era, when the legendary figures roamed the land, the spiritual veins of heaven and earth were all cut off. The legacies of spirit masters and martial cultivators were also close to being wiped out. This was the era with the least possibility. What was left was the desolate era where spiritual energy slowly recovered. However, this era lasted for tens of thousands of years. Only then did it welcome the explosion of spiritual energy in the God Emperor era. His thoughts were all over the place, and his heart was in a mess. Zhong Shou sat in the bucket, totally lost in thought. Only when the demon water in the bucket turned cold did he stand up with an ashen white face. Just as he put on his clothes, Chu Shui popped her head in from outside, her face filled with joy. "Young master, we have arrived at Twisted Gathering." "Twisted Gathering?" Zhong Shou's brows furrowed, waves rising in his heart. He quickly walked to the side of the window. Looking out, he saw a huge market that took up several miles of land appear in his field of vision. This wasn't the Twisted Gathering in his memory. The majestic city walls weren't built. Outside, there were only some fences to prevent wild beasts. Looking at the scene in front of him, Zhong Shou first relaxed, but then he was so emotional that he couldn't control himself. When the carriage stopped outside the market, Yin Yang left, not knowing where he went. As for Zhong Shou, Chu Shui accompanied him to tour around the market. The current Twisted Gathering wasn't as huge as it would be in the future, but it was already extremely prosperous. On both sides of the streets were shops that bought beast hides, beast crystals, and herbs. The people who walked all had weapons on them, giving off a fierce aura. The location was close to Dragon Lake Plains, and there were many clean water sources nearby. As a result, a large number of martial artists and spirit masters gathered here. Every day there would be no less than 1,000 people entering and exiting this place. However, although this place was filled with experts, and there were many people who killed people like flies, one didn't have to worry about one's own safety. Within the market, where the top sect in the far east of the cloud world guarded, private fights were forbidden. In this world, how many people dared to cause trouble here? This was also the reason why Yin Yang was at ease to allow him to tour the Twisted Gathering, which was filled with all sorts of people. Along the way, he observed the people around, as well as the many shops on the street. Zhong Shou was more and more sure of the era he was in, which made him relax. It should be between 10 to 50 years before the spiritual energy exploded. If it was a little earlier, there wouldn't be a Twisted Gathering on this Dragon Lake Plains. If it was a little later, Twisted Gathering would have started to take shape. Numerous martial cultivators and spirit masters felt the signs of spiritual energy increasing and gathered here. They went deep into the Dragon Lake Plains to train their hearts, martial techniques, and spells. He was a calm person, and when he came into contact with the God Emperor game, he nearly forgot about food and sleep, mostly because of interest. The runes within, as well as the peak of martial cultivation that no one had ever reached, made him obsessed. Actually, it was because he wasn't willing to compete with those perverted heroes of the God Emperor era. As for the legendary figures of the desolate era, he would hide if he could. However, compared to the end of the desolate era, where spiritual energy was also low, the God Emperor era was after the God Emperor era. Zhong Shou was more willing to choose this extremely bloody God Emperor era. Although it was dangerous, at least he could continue to study everything he wanted to know, to search for the peak of martial arts. Furthermore, in his last life, he had many regrets that he needed to solve one by one in this era where spiritual energy was about to explode. Baobing House, this Twisted Gathering house actually has a Baobing branch? Chu Shui suddenly said, breaking Zhong Shou's thoughts. Following Chu Shui's line of sight, he saw an average-sized weapon shop appear in front of him. Chapter 6. Baobing House. Zhong Shou remembered that this Taishang family that specialized in weapons was really famous in the future. They pretty much monopolized close to 20% of the weapon and armor trade in the cloud world. They even expanded to other worlds, even those spirit realm worlds. They were famous for their high prices and high quality. All high-grade martial artists would choose this Baobing house when they searched for weapons. Coincidentally, at this moment, he also wanted to find some suitable defensive weapons for himself in this twisted gathering. He only hesitated for a moment before walking in with large strides. The shopkeeper here was around 30 years old. Just like how Zhong Shou remembered, the shopkeepers of Baobing House all over the place were all smiles. They looked gentle and humble, calm and honest, and also had the craftiness of a businessman. Just one look and he could tell that the two of them weren't ordinary and that they weren't from a normal rich family. He personally went up to welcome them. Zhong Shou didn't care at all, roughly sizing up the place. The weapons here were all high-quality products that were forged thousands of times. Normal martial artists wouldn't be able to get their hands on them. Then, his eyes turned to the corner where the various projectile weapons were placed. After looking around, he shook his head inwardly. Those talisman weapons weren't common in this era. He didn't feel disappointed, turning to the shopkeeper and asking, "Can we customize weapons here?" The middle-aged shopkeeper smiled when he heard that. As long as the requirements aren't too high, no matter what weapon it is, as long as it is a branch of our Baobing house, we can customize it. Does young master have a weapon blueprint? Or you can describe it? Zhong Shou didn't reply, directly walking to the side of the counter. He took out 2 pieces of yellow paper and started to draw. In just a moment, a lancet knife and a long needle were drawn on the paper. The shape was normal and there was nothing special about it. However, there were some unknown lines carved on it, making it look beautiful. Chu Shui looked on curiously but couldn't see anything. In the end, she said, "Young master's drawing is really good, much better than before. Does Linhai College also teach drawing?" Hearing this, Zhong Shou smiled and threw down the weasel hair brush in his hand. His expression turned cold. The blade must be 2 inches long and as thin as a cicada's wing. It was refined from steel and mixed with 3 grams of blood copper. "I want 300 of these blades." The same material was needed for the needles. They are divided into 4 sizes: 2 inches, 1 inch, 3 fun, 1 inch, and half an inch. Each size requires 100. How long will it take to make all of this? Numerous deep wrinkles appeared on the shopkeeper's forehead. After pondering for a while, he said with a bitter smile, "Although the things that young master drew are small, they are extremely exquisite. Especially these lines, they should be seal soldiers, right? Although our branch store can build it, we can't build it. But we don't have enough people. It will take at least 10 days to get all the runes right." Zhong Shou had already expected that it would only take 10 days, which was far beyond his expectations. However, he didn't have that much time to wait. Ordinary blacksmiths naturally can't. But as far as I know, there are spirit blacksmiths in every branch of Baobingzai. I need to get all these items within an hour. The shopkeeper looked at Zhong Shou with a weird expression. Then, he nodded his head slightly. "There are indeed 3 of them in my shop. However, the price to hire a spirit blacksmith to craft these weapons isn't cheap. 300 willow leaf talisman knives, 400 steel talisman needles. The materials and labor would only cost 7,000 silver. However, for a talisman master to craft it would cost at least 150,000 silver." Zhong Shou scoffed coldly, turning around and looking at Chu Shui. Anyways, he had no money on him, so he could only ask his maidservant for help. Since he could sit in the carriage and use 16 cloud stepping foals, he should be able to easily take out such a small amount of silver. The latter didn't disappoint him, casually taking out a silk bag. Inside, more than 300 crystals of various colors were swaying, producing pleasant tinkling sounds. Then, she took out 2 fire-red crystals and placed them on the counter. This caused the shopkeeper's eyes to light up. Grade 3 Fire Tiger crystals can be worth 100,000 silver. Young master, please wait a moment. 300 talisman knives, 400 talisman needles, you will only need half a cup of tea to get them. After saying that, he turned around and left. Zhong Shou was at a loss. He had some such crystals himself. They were all grade 2 and 3 beast crystals, which he hid in the bag he carried with him. However, 1 grade 3 Fire Tiger crystal was worth 100,000 silver. What kind of joke was that? A moment later, he comprehended something. At this time, the spiritual energy was really thin, so such beast crystals were probably really rare. The rarer something was, the more valuable it was. Naturally, it was more valuable than in the future. His family was probably not only really rich, but they were also really strong. He had already ordered the flying knives and needles. What he lacked was a sword. Although the steel sword he carried with him was sharp, it was still a little lacking. However, this sword didn't need to be custom-made. This Bibing house had many talisman swords which were placed at the front as the treasure of the shop. Moreover, they were all carefully crafted. Standing in front of the weapon rack, Zhong Shou hesitated for a long while before taking out a shining pine-pattern wind sword. Out of the few talisman swords, this one wasn't outstanding. However, the wind could increase one's speed and defend one's body. It was really light and didn't use up too much stamina, which was what he needed. He casually waved it around, barely managing to use it. Chu Shui's brows were furrowed as she said hesitantly, "Young master, these talisman swords don't have true qi and spiritual sense and are hard to use. Why don't you use normal weapons?" Zhong Shou didn't reply, silently directing the energy in his energy ocean into the body of the pine-pattern wind sword. Just as the talisman was about to be activated, Chu Shui suddenly turned around, her upper body slightly bent down, her eyes filled with killing intent as she looked warily at the door. At the same time, a laugh spread out in Zhong Shou's ear. "It really is a small world. Who knew that I would meet cousin in such a remote place like Twisted Gathering? Didn't Brother Shou learn that spell in Linhai College? Why did you come here?" At the entrance of the shop, an elegant teen was smiling as he walked in. He was also extremely handsome. His words and demeanor made one feel like they were bathed in the spring breeze. Zhong Shou's body instinctively shrank back. He instinctively felt fear towards this guy and also a bit of hatred. In the next moment, his eyes constricted, knowing that it was the remaining instinct of his body. In this era, apart from those few people who were above the masses, he was confident that he could deal with those ascended realm experts who didn't appear in the world. What ability did this person have to make him fear him? He directly swept past him and threw himself behind him. Behind this person, there were 2 valiant men who followed closely. They were expressionless, their auras were deathly still, like the shadows of the teen. However, in his eyes, these 2 people were like swords hidden in cloth, unable to hide their sharpness and extremely dangerous. Be it this teen or the 2 servants behind him, they all had great strength. Compared to Chu Shui, they weren't any weaker. However, he didn't recognize the 3 of them. There were only a few fragments in the mind of the one who called him cousin. He could only turn around and act like he was at a loss. That teen was really cooperative, looking at Zhong Shou and smiling. "You stayed in the college for 3 years and don't recognize me. When we were young, you often called me Brother Yu, do you remember?" Only then did Zhong Shou act like he understood. However, Chu Shui scoffed coldly, her killing intent burning even brighter. "Hypocrite, young master has dozens of brothers, but only you like to be hypocritical. Weren't the people that Uncle Ian and I killed the last few days sent by you? Trying to assassinate the prince, your entire family will be wiped out. Sooner or later, the ruler will wipe out all of you who betray your master." Zhong Yu didn't care, instead laughing out loud. "Wipe them all out? Long time no see, Shui, you are still so cute, I really can't bear to kill you. Kiki, if it was a few months ago, how would I dare to have such thoughts? However, now that my uncle is confirmed dead, even if I take your life, what can others do to me? Chu Shui's face instantly turned ashen white, her body shaking as she scoffed coldly. What nonsense are you saying? Only a fool would believe. Zhong Yu scoffed like he was too lazy to argue with Chu Shui, continuing to talk to himself. Now that the Monster King position is empty, there are people with ulterior motives and strong enemies outside. Are we really going to let this piece of trash sit on the throne? Looking at Zhong Shou, Zhong Yu laughed coldly. I came here to tell Brother Shou. After all, we are brothers. If you are willing to give up the prince position, I can let you live. If not, don't blame me for being vicious. This isn't like when we were young. As long as you begged, I would let you go. After he finished, he waved his sleeves and left. Within Baibing House, Chu Shui's face was ashen white, while Zhong Shou was deep in thought. Chapter 7. He bought the pine pattern wind sword from Baibing House and took the willow mark knife and silver needles. The two of them lost interest in shopping and directly returned to the carriage. Chu Shui kept silent and didn't try to hide the worry in her eyes. Only when Zhong Shou returned to the carriage did she suddenly open her mouth. Young master, that Zhong Yu has always been cunning. His words are always half true and half false, so don't mind him. Ruler just temporarily doesn't have news of him. He definitely didn't fall. With his ability, how many people in this world can do anything to him? Zhong Shou thought to himself, if you don't mind what Zhong Yu said, then why did Chu Shui act like that? Even if his father, who he had never met and didn't have any memories of, didn't die. He was afraid that the situation wasn't good either. If he didn't have a certain amount of confidence, why would Zhong Yu take such a huge risk and not care about the consequences to kill him? His heart felt cold, but Zhong Shou didn't show it on his face. After smiling warmly, he stepped into the carriage. However, when he sat down, his expression was filled with a bitter smile. What should he do? Looking at Zhong Yu, it was obvious that he had everything in his hands. The moment he stepped out of Twisted Gathering, it would be the moment he acted. Although he didn't know what trump cards Zhong Yu had, just him and those two servants were already tough to deal with. Was he going to die right after coming to this era? Although he didn't know what was going on, he didn't know if he had any hope of returning. However, even ants wanted to live, much less humans. His gaze slowly turned cold. Zhong Shou flipped his right hand and took out a few silver needles and a green crystal. He prepared the silver needles for himself. Using acupuncture along with the energy leading technique, it could strengthen the body. The latter was taken from his bag, a grade 2 green-faced wolf beast crystal. On the market, it was worth 10,000 silver and 100 gold. However, if Zhong Shou was willing, these two items could be used for other purposes to deal with this imminent crisis. However, once this step was taken, there was no way to stop it, and there was no turning back. If he couldn't reach the peak, what awaited him would only be hell. After a moment of silence, Zhong Shou sneered. If he was still hesitating at this point, his temperament would be too weak. Before he entered Twisted Gathering, he already knew that he had no other choice. So why was he still hesitating? He lit up the lights in the carriage and baked the steel needles for a moment. Then Zhong Shou didn't care about Chu Shui outside. Holding the needles in his right hand, his arm was as steady as a clamp. He accurately pierced the inch-long steel needles into the patient's body. A total of 40 of them were inserted into various acupoints. He sat cross-legged with his eyes closed, as if he didn't feel any pain at all. Within the cloud world there were many races. Therefore, everyone's meridians and acupoints are different. Even if they were brothers born from the same parents, there would still be some differences between them. Only all the important acupoints and the 9 chakras of the body were similar. As a half-monster, Zhong-Shou also had 2 parallel meridians, so he had to be careful. These needles were the golden needle acupoint testing technique that he learned in his last life. It was derived from acupuncture treatment, and its value was even higher than those top-secret techniques. Normal martial artists could only know the exact locations of a few common acupoints in a single chakra meridian. Only when medical science became more advanced did it improve. In his last life, Zhong-Shou used this needle technique to accurately find all the acupoints in a single chakra meridian. Be it the speed of cultivation or the accumulation of true qi, it wasn't something that normal martial artists could compare to. After inserting the steel needles, Zhong-Shou activated his internal qi, and it flowed around his body like lead and mercury. Then, in less than half a moment, his face had already turned pale, and his forehead was covered in dense sweat. It was actually much more tiring than practicing the sword once. Body Chakra 9 Meridians. First cultivate the foundation meridian to strengthen the foundation and solidify the source. 2 parallel chakra meridians to find 16 acupoints each is not bad. However, I only found 5 of these wind spirit extra acupoints after searching my entire body several times. Forget it, 5 it is. After all, he had just opened up his energy ocean and didn't have enough true qi, so he couldn't truly measure his entire body. To be able to find half of them was based on Zhong-Shou's experience in his last life, which was enough to make him satisfied. In the future, when his cultivation improved, he would naturally be able to completely control this chakra meridian. What he cared about the most was still the wind spirit extra acupoints. There were a total of 5 of them, no more and no less. There was no surprise, and he wasn't disappointed either. His hands waved once more, and they were still stable and accurate. He pulled out the steel needles one by one, drawing out bloodlines. He wasn't affected by his weak body at all. Following which, Zhong-Shou took out a few finger-sized green crystals and held them in his hand. They were all grade 2 green-faced wolf beast crystals. Without the slightest hesitation, he let out a soft shout. Energy swallow. At that moment, Zhong-Shou's left hand was like a magnet. The surrounding spiritual energy, and even the dust nearby were all sucked in. Within his palm, 2 thin and weak threads of brutal essence energy started to flow down his arm and into his energy ocean. It circulated on the outside, taming it step by step, allowing the vital energy in his body to cleanse it. It was like a sieve, washing away the impurities within. His left hand held needles once more, stabbing them one by one into his body. A total of 27 needles were stabbed into his abdomen. It caused the cycle to repeat tens of times until it was purified to the maximum before it was directed into his chakra meridians. At the same time, Zhong-Shou spat out a mouthful of blood. The moment the essence energy of the beast crystals entered his body, Zhong-Shou's eyes lit up. It forcefully expanded the sea of qi that he had just opened to 2 times its original size. This essence energy wasn't worth mentioning in the eyes of a high-grade martial cultivator. However, compared to him, it was a huge amount. His energy ocean was unable to store it, so it spread all around. It spread to every corner in the surroundings. A large portion of the essence energy was forcefully directed by Zhong-Shou. Like a flood, it was forcefully injected into the lowest part of his energy ocean, at the entrance of the 2 thick meridians. A crisp, cracking sound broke out in his ears, and he felt something sweet in his throat. His entire body was in intense pain, like numerous high-speed spinning drills were stabbing into his body at the same time. His consciousness nearly fainted. Who knows how long had passed, but Zhong-Shou slowly came back to his senses. Looking into his abdomen, he saw that it was a mess. Numerous wounds were caused by the essence energy that was moving about randomly. The only thing that made him slightly happy was that a portion of the meridians and acupoints had been opened up under his energy ocean. Wisps of inner breath flowed in his body. In his senses, there were 8 more small light spots in his body. They were spread out on the 2 chakra meridians, opposing one another. The price was that the chakra meridians were riddled with holes. There was also the pain in his abdomen that hadn't lessened till now. Luckily, half of the essence energy was used up. The remaining portion was slowly being controlled by him. Zhong Shou gave a self-mocking laugh. When normal people cultivated, they would proceed step by step, opening up their chakra meridians and strengthening their internal energy. However, with his dual meridian body, any true energy that circulated in his body would be split apart and clash with one another. The intense pain was unbearable, and it was impossible to complete. Apart from those special martial arts and a few spiritual medicines that could change the bloodline, the only thing he could do was to try. The only way was to do what he did just now, not caring about the process, using a barbaric method to forcefully open it. At this moment, his energy ocean and foundation chakra were already at their limit. If he continued, the outcome would be unpredictable. He would need at least 4 days to heal up before he could try again. However, the pain just now was just the beginning. Apart from the 9 main meridians, there were many extra acupoints outside the meridians. The wind spirit extra acupoint that he found not long ago was Zhong Shou's target. To him, the importance of these 5 extra acupoints far exceeded the body chakra meridians. Chapter 8. Half a day later, Yin Yang, who had gone to who knows where, finally returned. He brought a few huge bags with food, clothing, spices, etc. It was enough for a few years. However, his face was dark and sunken, several times worse than when he left. Returning to the carriage, he didn't hide anything for the first time. He called Chu Shui into the carriage and directly set it in front of Zhong Shou. After hiding it for so many days, the situation is so dangerous. Yin Yang doesn't dare to hide it from the prince. Actually, there has been no news from the ruler for several months. I went to find people to investigate, and they said that half a month ago, someone personally witnessed the ruler being forced into the oblivion cloud ocean. There was a light clanging sound in the carriage. Chu Shui accidentally knocked over the teacup beside her, her face devoid of blood. Zhong Shou's eyes squinted, not saying a word. He was currently in the Donglin cloud continent of the cloud world, floating above the cloud ocean. 12 million miles around, it was one of the 5 largest continents of the cloud world. The Oblivion Cloud Ocean was south of this Donglin cloud continent. Ancient legends said that there were many mysterious places here. Be it man or beast, they would definitely die if they entered. 10,000 years later, the mysteries of this place were discovered by people. However, at this time, this Oblivion Cloud Ocean was still a death zone. Especially before spiritual energy exploded out, apart from those ancient people in the cloud world, no one could enter deep. It was no wonder that his cousin had such guts. Entering the Oblivion Cloud Ocean, one's chances of survival were slim. Chu Shui calmed herself down, gritting her teeth and insisting, "It is just the Oblivion Cloud Ocean. With the ruler's ability, he might be able to come out from there." Yin Yang expressionlessly looked at her and didn't bother. The ruler isn't someone with a short lifespan. Yin Yang knows about his methods. The problem is the battle for the Gantian mountain throne. The few brothers and nephews of the ruler are all ambitious people. For example, that Zhong Yu. Chu Shui held her breath and didn't argue, furrowing her brows. Isn't it just fighting for that Gantian mountain master position? If worse comes to worst, young master will not be the crown prince. But if we can't borrow the strength of Gantian mountain, how will the prince deal with the few enemies of the ruler? Yin Yang laughed coldly, his fists clenched tight, his eyes filled with cold, killing intent. I, Yin Yang, am a man of my words. I promised the ruler that I would protect the prince for the rest of his life and let him inherit the position of Gantian Mountain Monster King. Even if he were to die without a burial place, he would not be willing to break his oath. In short, they couldn't stay here any longer. Before the monarch left, he ordered us to escort the crown prince to the Lingyun sect. Now that he thought about it, he should have expected this. As long as he arrived at Danling Mountain a day earlier, he would be safe. The Elixir Spirit Mountain had strict rules, unlike Linhai College. This trip will be even more dangerous, so please be mentally prepared, Your Highness. Chushue heaved a sigh of relief, following which hesitation appeared in her eyes. Leave now? Just now, young master and I met Zhongyu. Li Ling and Li Du were both there. Who knows, maybe his senior brothers also participated. Before he finished speaking, Yin Yang waved his sleeves and forcefully interrupted him. Right now, it's only Zhongyu and the Li brothers. In a few days, those people with evil intentions will come after hearing the news. It will be even harder to step out of Twisted Gathering. His words didn't allow anyone to doubt him. When Yin Yang did things, he was swift and decisive. She immediately got up and walked out of the carriage. Chu Shue's expression changed. Only when the carriage rose into the air did she say with a dejected expression, "It was Shue who harmed young master. If I knew that this would happen, I would have let young master stay in Linhai College." Zhong Shou had totally gotten over it, smiling like it had nothing to do with him. On the contrary, he was a little worried about Chu Shui. His father asked people to bring him out of Linhai College at such a time. He probably thought that the college's strength was far from enough to protect him. From this, one could see how strong the enemy was. Zhong Shou didn't care much about the position of prince. He also thought about giving it up and letting his cousins fight for it. However, hearing Yin Yang's words, it didn't seem like a good plan. Apart from taking the risk to escape to Pill Spirit Mountain, there was no other way out. Anyways, he couldn't avoid walking on the tip of a knife. In comparison, he cared more about the identity of his father. This Gantian mountain was once one of the shrines of the monster race. After the spiritual energy exploded, it still ruled the west of Donglin Cloud Continent, millions of monster race. He only remembered that in these few decades, Gantian Mountain had many different monster kings. There weren't any outstanding people amongst them. And those heroes who appeared one after another in the Divine Emperor's era were too dazzling. As such, this Gantian Mountain became a blind spot in his memory. He didn't even know the names of those few monster kings. Not to mention the people before the God Emperor era. During these few days, he barely remembered that 10,000 years ago in the Cloud World, there was a Sky Fox Zone family that was really famous. However, without new clues, it was hard to tell which demon monarch his father was. Chu Shui still sat at the side, frowning. Zhong Shou's brows furrowed, silently taking out a willow talisman knife. Like a butterfly, it spun at his fingertips. It was as thin as a cicada's wing but had a lot of weight. It gave off a totally different feeling from the ironwood flying knife. On the body of the knife, the talismans carved were similar to the pine pattern wind sword he bought. One was speed, the other was sharpness. When the knife shot out, it would be even faster and the tip of the knife would be even sharper. If one had to talk about what was different, it would be that after 13,000 years, it had been improved. The effect was far above that of this era. Apart from that, some lines were added. It was totally useless, but it wouldn't affect the effect and make it hard for one to see the true mysteries of the talisman. Just as the talisman knife was in his hand, Zhong Shou could feel that the spirit blacksmith of the treasure weapon pavilion was really extraordinary. The length was exactly the same, and the amount of blood copper added was just right. It was like many blood vessels that were distributed within the knife. The spiritual energy patterns on the knife body were also perfect. He continued to spin it until the shape, center of gravity, weight, and thickness of the knife were all clear to his chest. Only then did the flying knife glow suddenly stop. This was also one of the key points of the Six Gods' defensive knife technique. If one didn't know the flying knife like the back of one's hand, if one didn't have the complete knowledge of the knife, How could one shoot out a knife that could take one's life and soul? The best method was to personally craft it. However, the current conditions weren't realistic, so he could only make do with it. The handle was facing outwards, the tip was facing inwards, facing his palm. Zhong Shou held it like that, closing his eyes and sitting quietly. Threads of true qi were injected into the body of the knife, and then through the red copper veins, it circulated from within. At this moment, apart from the foundation chakra and energy ocean, which had opened up 4 acupoints each, on his right arm and left chest, there were 5 brighter spots, independent of the 9 chakra meridians. These were the extra acupoints outside the meridians of the wind element. In the medical books of the future, they were named as Lingqi, Luantai, Fengxia, True Light, and Guanfeng. After the 4 foundation chakra acupoints were opened, the essence energy that was taken out from the green crystal was used by Zhong Shou to attack these 5 extra acupoints. At this moment, not only were these acupoints opened up, but they were also filled with true qi converted from the wind beast essence energy. The amount of true qi stored in each extra acupoint far exceeded the qi that was circulating in the foundation chakra. This was also a special technique that he found in the future, opening up extra acupoints to increase one's strength. The 6-god defensive knife technique used qi to drive the knife, using spirit to nourish the blade. He was far from being able to do the latter. However, with the true qi stored in these 5 extra acupoints, he could barely do the former, using qi to drive the knife. Threads of true qi were continuously injected into the cycle. In just a moment, Zhong Shou had a spiritual sense connection with the knife in his hand. He stopped there and changed to another flying knife. With his current realm, it was impossible for him to use spirit to nourish the knife and control it as he wished. In less than an hour, the cloud-crossing carriage had already passed through the twisted spirit gathering and was once again speeding through the wilderness. The scenery outside the window flashed by, and a few people standing on a hill in the distance jumped into his field of vision. Feeling a piercing pain at the center of his brows, Zhong Shou placed down the knife in his hand and looked out of the window. "It's Zhong Yu and the Li brothers. Shui, do you know who that person is?" Beside Zhong Yu, an old man appeared. His face was wrinkled, and he carried a long sword on his body. His hands were like bird claws. Chu Shui had noticed the people outside long before he did. At this moment, her pupils had shrunk to the size of a needle. "That is Wu Wei, Burning Sword Wu Wei." Chapter 9. Burning Sword Wu Wei? Zhong Shou took in a deep breath before shaking his head. He had no impression of such a name. However, just by looking at him, the person in front of him was indeed amazing. Looking at the surface of his skin, it shone with a metallic luster as tough as iron. He had trained his martial arts to the level of his skin, close to the peak of internal training. Out of the 9 meridians of the bodily chakra, he had at least opened 7. His aura was as sharp as a blade, having obtained the true meaning of the sword path. Such a person, even 100 years later, would have a place in the cloud world. He was an expert on the same level as Yin Yang beside him. "Young master, you have never heard of him?" After the initial shock, Chu Shui's expression returned to normal. His tone was filled with calmness, without any fluctuations. "This person is senior brother Zhong Yu. He is also a disciple of Duyang Mountain. 2 years ago, to avoid capture, he killed 5 mythic masters of Defling City in half a day and left. It was said that the entire west of the Donglin cloud world was shocked. I heard that hundreds of martial artists died in his hands." Zhong Shou nodded slightly. He had heard of Defling City, a huge city of the human race near the ice ocean. Their strength was not any weaker than some small countries. He had roped in countless experts and also had many exquisite martial arts inheritances. Within the cloud world, 3 chakra meridians were the first grade. The heaven, earth, and body chakra 27 meridians were split into martial warrior, martial master, mythic master, Xiantian master, martial ancestor, Xuanwu ancestor, ascended ancestor, grandmaster, and spiritual grandmaster. Each grade was further split into 3 levels. Above that was the immeasurable celestial realm. In the future he was in, people who could open up their meridians and break through to the peak of internal training were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. Even in the God Emperor game, tens of years after the explosion of spiritual energy, most of the players remained at the Xiantian Master and Grandmaster level. Mythic Masters, no matter in that era, could be the backbone of a power. For this burning sword Wu Wei to be able to kill 5 cultivators of the same grade, he definitely had secret technique. Apart from that, he was also familiar with this Duyang mountain. It should be said that he was quite famous. In the early period of the Divine Emperor's era, he stirred up trouble. However, what he cared about more was the girl beside him. His expression clearly showed that he was prepared to fight to the death. As if worried that he would be afraid, Chu Shui suddenly hugged him and muttered, "Young master, don't be afraid." Jun Shang had already guessed it and had Shui bring that thing out. "Young master will definitely be fine." Zhong Shou was caught off guard and was hugged tightly. For a moment, his nose was filled with the girl's fragrance. The next thing he felt was how big it was. His entire face sank into it. He almost couldn't believe it. It was soft and comfortable. Was this Shui really only 13 years old? Subconsciously, she wanted to struggle free, but her heart stirred, and she had a naughty thought. She rubbed her head against Chu Shui's chest and said in a muffled voice, "I'm not afraid. I'm just worried about Shui. Oh, so soft, so fragrant. I really want to take a bite." "Young master." Just as Chu Shui revealed a touched expression, her body froze, her face flushed red as she jumped back. Zhong Shou didn't feel ashamed, thinking to himself that this girl was actually afraid of skin contact. After laughing out loud, he looked out of the window. Coincidentally, he exchanged glances with Zhong Yu, who was on the top of the hill, only to see that sinister gaze was filled with disdain, like he was looking at a dead person. Then, his line of sight was totally blocked by the edge of the window. Scoffing coldly, Zhong Shou continued to let the willow leaf talisman knife spin in his right hand. However, compared to before, it was a little faster. His wrist was as stable as a clamp, adding 30% more strength. However, his aura was even calmer, like it wasn't there at all. Chu Shui was slightly startled, forgetting the awkwardness from before. She turned around and looked closely at Zhong Shou. There was obviously nothing wrong with him, but for some reason, at this moment, Zhong Shou gave her a feeling of extreme danger. It was like the person sitting beside her wasn't the young master who had cultivated for 10 years but didn't achieve anything and was called trash by others. Instead, he was an ancient beast that wanted to eat people. On a small hill that was less than 60 feet high, Zhong Yu was looking at the carriage 2,500 feet away. His expression was dark and vicious. After a long while, he laughed coldly. "As I expected, heh? These few people definitely aren't willing to stay in Twisted Gathering. Senior Brother Wu, now that you have seen them, do you have confidence? That little girl isn't a problem, the 3 of you can deal with her. However, this Yin Yang..." Thinking back to that person who was sitting at the front of the carriage, riding 16 cloud stepping foals in one hand, looking majestic and muscular, Wu Wei's eyes gradually turned serious as he subconsciously tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. A few green veins popped out on his shriveled hand. This person's martial path isn't ordinary. He isn't someone normal cultivators can compare to. Wu Wei isn't his match. This person is from the human race, so why would he work for your Gantian mountain? Zhong Yu's brows furrowed slightly. I also don't know his background, only that he is a disciple of a large sect. Because my uncle helped him, he actually abandoned his sect and came to Gantian mountain to be a coachman. His ability is really amazing. Senior brother really can't do anything to him? Actually, you just have to delay him for a while. I only said that I am not his match, but that doesn't mean that I can't do anything to him. 3 days later, your senior brotherly will rush over to Dragon Lake Plains. Saying this simply, curiosity appeared on Wu Wei's face. As for that prince, how are you going to deal with him? He is your cousin, are you really going to kill him on the spot? I, Zhongyu, am not so stupid. Laughing coldly, Zhongyu totally relaxed. My uncle has been running for 30 years, and there are some loyal people in the various races under him. Even if I don't want that trash to become the Monster King, I can't bear to see my only descendant die in the hands of others. Those brothers of mine are all really ambitious. They probably want me to kill this Zhong Shou and make me the scapegoat. Just now I was just scaring him. I know the theory of using the emperor to command the nobles. When Wu Wei heard this, he directly shook his head. Master told me to go all out to help you. Even if you kill this person, it is okay. If those brothers of yours block you, just kill them all. So what if you kill everyone in Gantian Mountain? Zhong, you didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My Gantian Mountain isn't that small Defeng city. Even if my uncle isn't here, Master has to be wary of him. Forget it, even if I say it, senior brother won't understand. As for my cousin, although I won't kill him, I won't let him have an easy time. A piece of trash who can't cultivate any internal energy can actually become the prince. Are we really going to let an impure bloodline bastard take over as the Monster King and control the million monster race in Gantian Mountain? While speaking, who knows what Zhongyu thought about? On the right side of his face, there was an ugly bloody scar that looked like a scar. In Zhongyu's eyes, there was a bone-deep hatred. If this kid lands in my hands, I will make him wish he was dead. Wu Wei kept silent. What relationship did his junior brother have with that prince? What hatred did they have? He didn't know and wasn't willing to ask. He came to this Dragon Lake Plains only to kill. To head to Lingyun Sek's Pill Spirit Mountain, one needed to pass through Dragon Lake Plains to reach the east of the Cloud Continent. It would take half a month. Unexpectedly, the carriage traveled on the plains for 5 days. Until they walked out of the swamp region, it was a safe journey. The sneak attack that they had been guarding against didn't come. Only the suppressive atmosphere before the storm was getting thicker and thicker. Chu Shui was even more wary, standing on the roof of the carriage. Zhong Shou was calm, staying in the carriage to cultivate. Even when the carriage stopped, he didn't come out. A full 300 willow talisman knives had been tested one by one. He only kept 5 of them, keeping them in his sleeves and hiding them close to his body. With his current cultivation, he couldn't take another step forward to use his mind to nourish the knife. However, if he wore it every day, it could strengthen his spiritual sense and was quite effective. As for the other flying knives, he used them to continue practicing. He didn't use internal energy, just repeatedly shooting them out. After all, they were different from the ironwood flying knife. The weight and thickness were different. A small mistake could cause a deviation. 300 talisman knives, a large half of them were for his body to get used to controlling them. As for the true sure-kill knives, these 5 were enough. Chapter 10. Along with the 5 flying knives, there was also the pine pattern wind sword. Although the 6-god defensive knife technique was a flying knife technique. However, there were some secret techniques that had miraculous effects when used on other weapons. All he needed to do was make some slight changes and change his appearance. There were thousands of martial arts techniques in the world, and it was hard to count them all. However, in the end, they all had to return to the river and merge into one. There were many theories that could be used. In the last life, Zhong Shou had already understood this theory. His thoughts were quick, and he wasn't restricted by the old conservative martial arts concept. Every morning, he would inject true qi into the sword body, and it would flow a total of 49 times before stopping. After each time, he would wash the sword with clean water and smear beast oil on it. Zhong Shou called this the sword washing technique. This technique wasn't created by him, but he learned it from a friend who was also famous for his sword. After he improved it, he added in a portion of the mysteries of the six-god defensive knife technique. It could wash away the impurities and temper the sword body, allowing the talisman's sword to be connected to its spirit. However, no matter whether it was the talisman knife or wind sword, although he specially prepared it to protect himself, it didn't take up too much of his time. During these 5 days, Zhong Shou focused more on his own cultivation. His energy ocean and foundation chakra were opened, and the door to martial cultivation was opened. Within the carriage, a light breeze blew. It didn't come from outside the window, but from the fist wind that Zhong Shou punched out. However, more of it came from his wide sleeve. Stepping in a weird footwork, along with his rhythmic breathing, Zhong Shou walked around in this small space of less than 40 square meters. His fists danced around, sometimes as quick as a storm, sometimes as soft and powerless as if there was no technique at all. It seemed a little weird, but only Zhong Shou himself could feel that all the blood in his body was like a flood, surging and surging. Maybe if Yin Yang was here, he would be able to see the abnormality. Even if he couldn't recognize where it came from, he would know that it wasn't something that Gantian Mountain and Linhai College could have. Chu Shui only thought that Zhong Shou was practicing those strange movements again. It was no different from a few days ago, except that it was weirder. Occasionally, when she returned to the carriage, she would only give him a brief glance and not pay him any attention. Because of what happened that day, the girl didn't dare to be alone with Zhong Shou for the past few days. However, he did not know that this strange fist technique would become famous in the future. It was known as the spiritual breathing fist. In the future, it was the secret of the Snow Robe Temple, a great sect in the matron world. It was the best method of cultivating the fetus. Martial arts could be classified as internal and external. The cultivation of arterial pathways and true qi was classified as internal, while this set of fist techniques was classified as external. His self-created Daoyin technique was actually of the same nature. Within the body chakra, there were a total of 9 chakras. They were the foundation chakra, breath chakra, marrow chakra, bone chakra, blood chakra, wisdom chakra, visceral chakra, and external chakra. When a martial artist cultivated and opened the body chakra, it was a process of training the embryonic breathing, bone marrow, heart blood, 5 viscera, 6 viscera, skin and flesh. Finally, it was a process of strengthening the body. From the inside to the outside, one had to break through the body chakra and connect with heaven and earth. The following process was the reverse, using the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to refine the body from the outside to the inside. This was known as the 9 meridians chakras. However, even if one opened the arterial pathways, it was impossible to strengthen the body overnight. As time passed, the effects would slowly appear and strengthen the body bit by bit. At this time, one would need external help to speed up the process. The so-called external cultivation was thus born. This set of spiritual breathing fist passed down from the matron world trained the embryonic breathing fist within the body. It was a top technique to strengthen one's foundations. After practicing for a short while, Zhong Shou felt a warm feeling in his chest and abdomen. The so-called embryonic chakra had a total of 24 acupoints around the navel, forming a perfect circle. It was considered the beginning of life and the source of energy. Later generations verified that this was indeed the case. He had only practiced this spiritual breathing fist for 5 days, and there were already some effects. Yesterday, he had tested his strength. Even without using true qi, he was twice as strong as a few days ago. It wasn't entirely because of this fist technique. His special body was also one of the reasons. Inheriting 2 top bloodlines wasn't without benefit. Unfortunately, he could only practice this fist technique for 15 minutes. Not long later, Zhong Shou sat on the soft couch, covered in sweat. From the beginning to the end, his weak physical strength did not increase at all. As usual, he held a willow leaf flying knife and played with it in his hand. When his breathing calmed down, Zhong Shou straightened his body and sat cross-legged, holding a green crystal in his hand. The injury to the acupoints in his abdomen had already healed yesterday. To be safe, he purposely delayed until today. Once his spiritual breathing fist reached the small success stage, he would directly use it on his body. At the center of his palm, he used the energy swallowing technique to suck, and another thread of essence energy was swallowed into his body. However, it didn't go down to his abdomen, but to his right shoulder. The night before, he used the golden needle acupoint testing technique to confirm the position of a special acupoint outside of his meridians. It was the wind element spiritual acupoint. First, after all the essence energy was purified, it formed into a needle shape and pierced into this special acupoint. After it went in deep, it would explode. The process was violent but simple. At this moment, Zhong Shou was already familiar with it. However, the moment this wind element acupoint was opened, he nearly lost consciousness. His muscles twitched, and the unbearable pain made him want to lose his sense of pain or faint on the spot. However, in just a few breaths, he forcefully recovered. He took out 2 more beast crystals and used the energy swallowing technique. He gathered the remaining essence energy in his body and charged it down to his abdomen. A moment later, a wave of pain that was not inferior to the previous one assaulted his nerves. Zhong Shou's face was ashen white. He took in a few deep breaths, but the pain didn't subside. He decided to not bother, looking into his abdomen once more while he was still conscious. The crystals he used this time were the top-grade ones he picked out from tens of wind element beast crystals. The amount of essence energy he absorbed was close to double what it was 5 days ago. However, he only opened up 6 acupoints in his 2 foundation chakras. When a martial artist cultivated, every step they took was more difficult than the previous one. Those light spots had already formed an outline in his body. They surrounded his navel and energy ocean like a small ring. The energy circulating within was more than double what it was before. The injuries this time are more serious. Next time I will have to wait for 8 days. In the end, I underestimated this dual meridian body. The surging energy within his acupoints didn't calm down for a long time, and the pain continued. Just as Zhong Shou's consciousness was dizzy and was close to fainting. In the depths of his brain, there was an explosion. In that instance, numerous memory fragments crazily surged into his consciousness. Numerous scenes flashed in front of his eyes at the same time. A full 13 years of memories in this body totally exploded out at that moment. Following which, those memory scenes suddenly froze. A tall and handsome male appeared in his consciousness. He wasn't someone Zhong you could compare to. He smiled warmly towards him, but his aura was vast and majestic, like he could swallow mountains and rivers. Zhong Shou's pupils constricted to the size of needles. With these 13 years of memories, he finally remembered who the father of this body was. He thought that he was definitely not famous, but it was the blood maniac monster saint who crazily killed 13 ascended realm experts to take revenge for his son, the nine-tailed sky fox indefinite spirit emperor art. No wonder he was so familiar with it. Following which, the words, taking revenge for his son, paused in his consciousness for a moment. Zhong Shou suddenly laughed out loud in an extremely maniacal manner. His body tilted and fell, totally losing consciousness. Just as the laughter came to an abrupt stop, 2 people, one in front and one behind, jumped into the carriage. Yin Yang moved later but arrived first, helping Zhong Shou to stabilize himself. Right away, he pressed his hand on his pulse. A moment later, His expression was filled with both joy and worry. The prince has opened his chakra meridians and formed his foundation chakra. When he said these words, he was filled with both excitement and sadness. Chu Shui heaved a sigh of relief, following which she thought about something, looking at Zhong Shou with a pitiful expression. The ancients say that a tiger father will not beget a dog son. The prince's willpower is exceptional, and he can actually bear with such pain. Only this time, he was too hasty. Sighing slightly, Yin Yang carefully took out a pill bottle from his sleeves. The moment he took out a pill, he scoffed coldly. His eyes were cold as he looked out of the carriage window. They came so quickly. Chapter 11. His consciousness slowly woke up, and that unbearable pain had already faded. Zhong Shou used all his strength to open his eyes. His limbs were slowly regaining feeling, but he was still unable to move. Within his stomach, there were threads of cool energy that seeped into his body. It should be the power of the pill that woke him up and also suppressed the surging meridians in his body. Looking around, he was still within the carriage. However, the carriage below had already stopped, and many black runes appeared on the walls of the carriage. In the middle of the carriage was a purple jade ball. It was the size of a fist and hung in mid-air, slowly spinning, spiritual light shining all around. This is a chi formation? Spiritual artifact? Zhong Shou was startled, remembering that Chu Shui was a dual cultivator. She had enough spiritual power to activate this wind wall chi formation. This carriage and the jade ball in mid-air were probably left behind by the father that Chu Shui mentioned a few days ago, the one who would shock the cloud world in the future. Within the carriage, with this formation protecting, even if a Xiantian expert personally came. For a short while they could still keep their lives. Maniac Blood Monster Saint, Nine-Tail Fox King. When spiritual energy exploded out, there were only a few Ascended Realm experts in Donglin Cloud Continent. They were once as eye-catching as the sun, but also fell like shooting stars, causing numerous people in the future to sigh and wring their hands. For some reason, that name that they should only sigh with. Thinking about it now, they felt really close to it. Zhong Shou didn't know if it was because the situation when he fainted was similar to the situation before the real Zhong Shou disappeared, causing the remnant soul to resonate with him, or because of other reasons. Anyways, the 13 years of memories of this person were all stored in his mind. The pride of the heavens fell from the clouds once more. All the people close to him distanced themselves from him. He worked hard to cultivate, but he achieved nothing. He left his hometown and changed to the path of a spirit master. However, 3 years later, he was still seen as trash, mocked and looked down on by more people. Not long later, he would become a puppet in the hands of others, being tortured and dying on Gantian Mountain. The head on his neck would be hung on the mountain peak by the next Gantian Mountain Monster King, hanging his corpse for 3 months. His consciousness was still in a daze. At that moment, his chest was filled with unwillingness, sadness and rage. No matter what kind of pain it was, he could endure it. No matter how hard the training was, he could still persevere. But why was he unable to open his meridians? Could it be that he was truly a useless person? For the rest of his life, he could only hide under his father's wings and be sheltered by him? Absolutely not. Various thoughts filled his mind. Zhong Shou shook his head violently and forced himself to sit up. When the scenery outside the window entered his eyes once more, all the muscles in his body tightened. His ears, which had been temporarily deafened, instantly picked up the sounds around him. With a silent laugh, Zhong Shou moved his body slightly to warm up his limbs. He suddenly raised his sword and stood in front of the jade ball. This array isolated the carriage from the outside world. No one could enter and he could not leave. Luckily, in his last life, he had done some research on Spirit Master technique. He could be said to be good at talisman technique. He gathered energy at his fingertip and pointed at the spiritual light, totally cutting off the flowing spiritual energy. The jade ball in front of him started to spin crazily, floating in all directions. The purple patterns on the walls of the carriage also started to dim. Zhong Shou didn't bother anymore, holding the pine pattern wind sword as he shot out of the carriage door. He landed outside of the carriage, looking into the distance through a layer of wind wall that was still spinning. The wilderness, which was originally green, now had a few patches of blood. 5 to 6 corpses laid on it. The setting sun was like blood, and the vultures in the sky were crazily crying out as they circled around. The corpses were mostly beside the carriage, their throats ripped apart. 700 steps away, the sand was blowing and grass was flying everywhere. Nearby lay a person. His body was thin and his hands were like bird claws. However, his body shape was different, and it wasn't the Wu Wei he had seen before. He laid face down on the ground with no signs of life. Nearby, the sword light was like a waterfall, and the knife's shadow was like a flood. The dust and sand covered the area, and one couldn't see the person within. Using all his vision, he could only see that Yin Yang's chest had been pierced. Half of the broken blade was still in the wound, barely holding on under the maniacal sword light. What a burning sword! His eyes turning serious, Zhong Shou looked at the cat-eared girl not far away, who was covered in wounds. Her snow-white dress had turned into a bloody shirt. The exposed snow-white skin was full of outwards knife wounds. Shui, those 13 years of memories appeared in front of his eyes once more. They were childhood sweethearts, the two of them innocent. Everyone saw him as trash, a bastard, and the shame of Gantian Mountain. Only Shui didn't leave him. Even if he knew that these were the memories of that dead person, and that he had only spent less than half a month with this cat-eared girl. However, the corner of Zhong Shou's lips couldn't help but curl up. Usually, he was a little muddle-headed, but as long as he saw this girl, he would feel warm. However, just as this smile rose up, it turned into a cold and violent intent. It wasn't a battle, but a torture. She supported her heavily injured body to fight 6 people alone. Her footsteps were messy, and she was about to fall. Her hands were covered in sword claws, and even her defense was full of flaws. The other few people didn't bother to help, their eyes filled with disdain. Only Zhong Yu was like a cat playing with a mouse, circling half a foot around Chu Shui. Occasionally, he would slash Chu Shui's body or stab out a blood flower. His lips were smiling like he was really happy. As for the cat-eared girl, she didn't know what situation she was in. She was obviously having difficulty standing, but she still chased after Zhong Yu. Only when the wind around the carriage dissipated and the wind blades disappeared did she stop, her eyes filled with despair. Zhong Yu was startled, retreating several steps to avoid her. Zhong Shou looked over. Doubt flashed across his face, and then he smiled. So it is, Brother Shou. It seems like Shui's chanting isn't good enough. Kiki. Just now I was having a headache about how to open this wind wall formation. I won't kill you today. Why don't you follow me back to Gantian Mountain? With Brother Yu protecting you, no one will dare to steal your throne. However, this Shui is not bad, she is really strong, you have to give her to me. Zhong Shou was too lazy to bother. He was really focused as he looked up and down at Chu Shui. It was like he wanted to imprint every wound and sword wound on her body into his heart. He injected threads of true qi out of his chakra meridians into the pine-pattern maple sword. At the same time, his thoughts were wandering. What was the difference between killing people and cutting up corpses in real life? In the game in his last life, there was a person known as a maniac who cut up corpses. After killing people, he loved to torture corpses, making one unable to bear to look at him. At that time, Zhong Shou didn't understand and felt that it was a little weird. However, today, he unknowingly had the same violent thoughts in his heart. 10,000 years later, the Sword Emperor Tan Qiu's first battle in this era would be with these scum. Zhongyu didn't hear Zhong Shou reply for a long time. He thought that he was stunned, scoffing once more. I thought that you had improved these few years, but you are still too weak. Just as he was about to signal to the side to capture him, Zhong Shou suddenly spoke. Zhong Shou suddenly opened his mouth. Shui, those wounds, do they hurt? Chu Shui was already in a daze. After hearing that, although she was confused, she immediately shook her head. They don't hurt. However, Shui regrets not taking good care of young master. It is all Shui's fault. Zhong Shou felt pain in his heart when he heard that. However, he smiled. If they don't hurt, then take a good look. Your young master will help you vent your anger. I'll pluck off their heads and let you kick them like a ball, okay? At this moment, not only was Chu Shui shocked, a ball? Was it an embroidered ball? Was that supposed to be used for kicking? Even the people around were shocked. Zhongyu was both angry and amused, mocking, vent anger? You are just trash who can't even protect yourself. Who are you venting anger for? Little brother Shou, are you crazy or dumb? He waved his hand without a care, and the 3 blue-shirt swordsmen beside him all leaped out. Their bodies were like arrows as they pierced forward. Zhong Shou's brows furrowed, following which he calmly took in a deep breath, adjusting his body to its optimal state. The pine-pattern wind sword pointed forward, his hands clenching tightly. The hidden strength in his body suddenly exploded. His right foot stepped on the ground, and he dashed forward by 5 feet. In the future game, he had killed people like flies. However, in reality, be it battle or killing, this was the first time. However, he was surprisingly used to it, and didn't feel unfamiliar with it at all. In his chest, it was like there was a flame burning. In just a few steps, he could clearly see the faces of the people in front of him. They were all dressed in blue, and their bodies were muscular as they pounced forward. The eyes of the 3 of them were the green eyes of the low-grade wolf race. At this moment they were filled with coldness, but they didn't have any fighting spirit. In their minds, they probably didn't see him as an opponent. They only saw him as a clown who didn't know what was good for him. Mocking himself, Zhong Shou's right chest, the wind spirit extra acupuncture point known as Ling Qi, suddenly exploded open. It caused the true Qi within to explode and flow towards his feet. Wind stepping in a weird footwork, Zhong Shou's body flashed, bringing out an afterimage. Without any warning, he sped up by close to double. He appeared in front of the first person, pretty much face to face, looking at the shock and fear in his eyes. Sword charge. Without the slightest hesitation, the sword light pierced forward like lightning. A line of blood, along with numerous pieces of bone and flesh, crazily sprayed out from the throat. Chapter 12. When the blood spurted out, the other 2 blue-clothed swordsmen were stunned. Zhongyu, who was at the back, looked at the scene in disbelief. Did he see it wrongly? Although the person who died couldn't be compared to the Li brothers, he was still a peak martial warrior, someone who had opened up 3 meridians. His sword techniques could be considered exquisite among people of the same grade. His throat was slit so easily, and it was his cousin who couldn't even open up the chakra meridians? Zhong Shou's actions didn't stop at all. Swallow energy. Vital energy flowed in the opposite direction, and the chakra meridians reversed. At the tip of the pine-pattern wind sword, an extremely strong suction force exploded out. It sucked away all the spiritual energy in the person's body, as well as all the remaining life force. It turned into energy and gathered in the sword. Unfortunately, he didn't open his spiritual eye. If not, he could see that this person's soul was being sucked away by this sword. Heaven-swallowing energy conversion was just that cruel. It could swallow heaven and earth and swallow everything. He didn't wait for the essence energy from the corpses to flow into his body. A ball of green light exploded out from the pine-pattern wind sword. A small half of the essence energy exploded within the sword body, activating the wind element talisman within the sword. Following which, the sword light rose once more. Zhong Shou's footsteps were like he was dancing on the waves, and he unbelievably appeared beside another person. Yen Xiang. The beautiful green arc of light flashed slightly, and a head flew into the air. Large amounts of blood spurted out from the wound. When the two blue-clothed swordsmen fell one after the other, everyone present was dead silent. They could only hear the sound of swords and knives clashing 1,000 feet away. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. The mocking expression on Zhong Yu's face didn't even have time to recede. In an instant, he had slain 2 people. One sword through the throat, the other beheaded. Moreover, the sword stance and footwork he used were all extremely ordinary. Every martial cultivator had to learn the basic. In the hands of Zhong Shou, it was immeasurable. After being stunned for a moment, the other wolf race swordsman was killed by the same sword. Looking at Zhong Shou, who had increased his speed by several times and was rushing towards him like a bolt of lightning, Zhong Yu's heart suddenly trembled. At this moment, he actually felt a faint trace of fear. It was as if the person he was facing was no longer the cripple he had bullied when he was young, but a peerless expert with boiling killing intent. The long and narrow phoenix eyes that were looking straight at her no longer had the warmth and calmness from before, and only coldness remained. The killing intent was like a blade, causing his eyes to hurt. Just as he was about to lose his mind due to fear, 2 roars sounded beside him at the same time. Zhong Yu came back to his senses, only to see Li Ling and Li Du pouncing out like tigers. Immediately, he felt ashamed. How could he be afraid? He was afraid that his cousin would. Was it because of his lack of experience? They were only 2 peak warriors, yet they were able to cause him to panic? He, Zhong Yu, was a middle-grade martial master who had opened 5 meridians. He only needed 1 year to enter the mythic martial arts realm. Frowning, Zhong Yu pulled out his sword. In the next moment, he saw Zhong Shou flip his left hand, and a green light flashed across his eyes. Just as he didn't know why, blood blossomed from Li Ling's throat on the left. His eyes opened wide as he stared in front of him, his face filled with disbelief. What is that? Until the blood spurted out, Zhong Yu was still in a daze. Looking closely, he realized that there was a green-white flying knife in Li Ling's throat. It was shaped like a willow leaf, with blood patterns within, and was as thin as a cicada's wing. His pupils couldn't help but constrict. Was that a flying knife? Li Ling and Li Du were both 4 meridian martial masters, only slightly weaker than him. They had also gone through tens of battles. They died under a flying knife just like that? What kind of secret technique was that? If it was him, would he be able to escape from that flying knife? Li Ling. A sorrowful roar sounded out in the wilderness. Li Du's speed suddenly increased, his expression vicious as he charged at the thin figure in front of him. Waving the giant sword, he slashed down with a whistle. At this moment, Zhong Shou only had Li Du in his eyes. When that flying knife shot out, he didn't bother about it anymore. 6 gods' defensive knife, soul-breaking death. No one could live. Only using the energy-swallowing technique to absorb the energy from the 3 people, this knife had used up close to half of it. His gaze turned sharp, and the Luantai extra meridian in his body exploded out once more. The stored true force, combined with the remaining Yuanli, created a storm on the pine pattern wind sword, emitting a green light. Sword charge. It was another simple charge, but the sword was unstoppable. When the 2 swords clashed, it gave out a sharp king sound, and there were threads of fire. The huge recoil caused the 2 of them to lean back. Just as Li Du was trying to stabilize his body, Zhong Shou's right leg was already firmly planted on the ground. Using it as an axis, he spun his body. Swallow back. The shadow of the sword flashed and gently drew a line of blood on Li Du's throat. It wasn't a centimeter deep, nor a centimeter shallow, but it sliced through Li Du's trachea and arteries. swallowing the heavens and transforming essence also swallowed all the life essence and even the soul of this low-level martial master. Following which, the pine-pattern wind sword in his hand shook, giving out a soft ring. Zhong Shou's body paused, coldly looking at Zhong Yu, who was just a few steps away. It wasn't that he wasn't willing to deal with this piece of trash in one go. It was because his body was in chaos, and his meridians were surging. Although the heaven-swallowing energy conversion and the extra meridian were top-secret technique. However, to use them, one had to pay a huge price. Especially his body, which was unbearable. If he killed the kid in front of him, Zhong Shou would probably collapse on the spot. At this moment, be it Zhong Yu or Chu Shui, they still hadn't come back to their senses. Looking at the few extra corpses on the grass, they couldn't shift their eyes away. They also didn't dare to believe that 2 low-grade martial masters and 3 peak martial warriors died under Zhong Shou's sword so easily. The entire process didn't even take 60 breaths. Chu Shui was originally lying on the ground in despair. At this moment, she was at a loss, looking around in a daze. Not long ago, she thought that she wouldn't be lucky this time. A moment later, the situation in front of her had changed. She didn't believe it and used her hand to poke her wound. It really hurt. A few breaths later, the storm brewing in Zhong Shou's body calmed down slightly. Then, he smiled towards Shui. Do you remember how the whip wounds on my cousin's body came about? Only then did Chu Shui come back to her senses, straightening her chest. She didn't bother about the dizziness from losing large amounts of blood, her voice was firm, her eyes filled with pride. In the past, when Zhong Yu offended the prince, the ruler ordered people to use the dragon whip to whip him for 3 days and 3 nights. He was chased out of Gantian Mountain and made a slave. I want him to remember that my prince isn't someone to be offended. Shut up. Zhong Yu's face was totally twisted. His face flushed red, numerous blood marks appearing, making him look ugly and vicious. Clenching his fists, energy exploded out, causing the grass and dust within 10 feet around him to rise up. Furious, Zhong Yu took a step forward. However, Zhong Shou was expressionlessly looking at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. His entire person felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over him. All his anger and frustration disappeared without a trace. If this Zhong Shou was still as strong as when he killed the Li family brothers. Today, not to mention taking revenge, whether or not he could leave safely was unknown. His expression was dark and sunken as he thought about it for a moment. Zhong Yu gritted his teeth and pounced towards Chu Shui, who was beside him. In his field of vision, he saw the lips of the teen coldly curl up. His right sleeve seemed like it was being blown by the wind. An invisible white light pierced through the air. Zhong Yu didn't have any chance to dodge as his throat was pierced. Poochie! Zhong Yu could even hear the sound of his throat bones breaking. Fresh blood left his body under the high pressure. In his field of vision, which was getting dimmer and dimmer, he saw Zhong Shou walk in front of him. What a waste! The person who tested this unparalleled martial art is such trash. Chapter 13. Zhong Shou took back the lancet knife from the neck of Zhong Yu, who had died with his eyes wide open. He casually waved his hand and shook off all the blood on it. The spiritual sense that he had nurtured on the knife was totally cut off the moment it left his hand. At this moment, he was only using this action to cover up his heaven energy swallowing conversion technique to suck away all of Zhong Yu's remaining vital energy and essence energy. Then, he lost interest and looked at Zhong Yu. He patted Chu Shui's head and laughed as he walked 1,000 feet away towards the place where the knife and sword were clashing. Saying that Zhong Yu and the others were trash wasn't just to provoke them, but because he really thought so in his heart. The truly dangerous one was 1,600 feet away, the one who had suppressed Yin Yang to the point where he couldn't retaliate. Burning Sword Wu Wei. Only this person could make him pay attention to him. Martial masters who had entered the peak of intermediate grade were much stronger than low-grade martial masters by more than a level. Even if he wasn't able to swallow it right away, the energy that Zhong Yu contributed was at least 30% more than the Li brothers. However, even if he absorbed all of it, along with the remaining true qi in his body, he could only use one flying knife that could cross grade 7 and challenge a 7 Meridian mythic master. If he succeeded, he would live; if he failed, he would die. When he walked 1,400 feet, Zhong Shou stopped beside the withered corpse. Then, he praised Yin Yang. Although he didn't know the name of the person who died, his bones and bones were clear. However, looking at the glow of his bones and skin, his cultivation was obviously above martial master and had reached the mythic martial realm. Yin Yang killed this person on the spot with lightning speed. Although he was heavily injured, he was able to prevent himself from being attacked from the front and back. He was really decisive and vicious. At this moment, the heavy knife's shadows were as firm as a wall. Under the vast sword light, he was still able to barely hold on, showing how tough he was. In the future God Emperor game, even if he couldn't be considered a mini-boss, he would at least be an elite. When he arrived here, he could already feel the devastating wind pressure. His skin was scraped painfully by the strands of sharp qi. Wu Wei's sharp gaze swept over from time to time. Almost every step forward required him to be tense and take a huge risk. A moment of absent-mindedness could cost him his life. With this person's movement technique and swift sword, it would take less than half a breath to take his life within 100 steps. In other words, it would only take the blink of an eye. Zhong Shou, however, continued to walk forward with a fearless look on his face. He only stopped when he was 15 feet away from Zhong Shou. He held the sword in his right hand while his left hand was hidden in his sleeve. Only a small section of the sword was exposed outside of his sleeve. It was faintly discernible and flickered with a cold light. At this distance, the flying dagger in his hand could reach him in an instant. "Young master!" Chu Shui followed closely behind him, her eyes filled with confusion. No matter how strong Zhong Shou's martial arts were, his inner breath was limited. Interfering in the battle of two mythic masters was too much for him, and he was overestimating himself. Just as he was worried and anxious, he saw that the sword light in the distance, which was like a river, suddenly stopped. The knife's shadow rose up once more, its aura even greater than that of the sword light. Zhong Shou just stood there, and one could see the bean-sized beads of sweat on Wu Wei's forehead. His gaze swept towards Zhong Shou's left hand, as if he was really afraid of it. Only then did she come to her senses. In this person's eyes, Zhong Shou's flying dagger was actually so strong. In the past, when Zhong Shou practiced his flying dagger, apart from feeling that it was fast and accurate, and that his actions were simple, she didn't feel anything else. However, today, be it Li Ling or Zhong Yu, facing this willow leaf flying dagger, they were unable to effectively dodge it. And at this moment, this knife which hadn't been released, even this blazing sword Wu Wei, who had killed numerous mythic masters, felt threatened. In that pair of dry eyes, other than resentment, shock and fear, there was clearly a hint of retreating. Zhong Shou seemed like he didn't feel anything, the corner of his mouth smiling. His eyes seemed to be closed, and his legs were not moving, like he had fallen asleep. As time went on, he slowly lost all signs of life. Wu Wei lost more and more of his mind. His sword light was in a mess, and there was no order to it at all. In just a few minutes, he was nearly injured by Yin Yang's knife several times. After holding on for a short while, he finally lost all will to fight. The sword light suddenly burned brightly, forcing Yin Yang back. His body flashed, and without hesitation, he retreated into the distance. Coincidentally, at this moment, Zhong Shou's face suddenly twitched, and blood seeped out of his mouth. Following which, His body knelt on the ground, and a series of heart-tearing light coughs sounded out. Wu Wei only took a few steps out before a look of surprise appeared on his face. His eyes were slightly hesitant, and his body suddenly turned. He directly abandoned Yin Yang, and the sword light was like a dragon, striking out 200 feet away. Chu Xue's beautiful face immediately turned pale, and Yin Yang's expression also changed greatly. The saber lights that filled the sky retracted, and then exploded into a saber shadow that was 100 times more intense, sweeping towards Wu Wei's back. However, his speed was a beat slower than the latter. In just a breath, the distance between the few of them was reduced to less than 10 feet. The tip of the sword was already in front of him. Zhong Shou's eyes suddenly opened. Although he was in extreme pain, his mind was still clear, and his killing intent was cold and filled with a mocking tone. What a waste! Why didn't you run when you had such a good chance? All the energy that he had absorbed, the 4-wind spirit extra acupoints, and the true qi that was flowing in his chakra meridians were all gathered at his fingertip. His left hand, which was hidden in his sleeves, didn't move at all, but a white light that was hard to see with the naked eye suddenly pierced through the air. Wu Wei, who was in midair, was terrified. The sword in his hand only needed to cross 5 feet and he would have taken the teen's life. However, he didn't dare to move forward anymore. With a light snort, the figure actually turned around without any support. His entire body hurriedly drew an arc, just in time to avoid the blade light that was shooting towards him. Just as he heaved a sigh of relief and laughed coldly. However, he saw that the talisman knife's trajectory had also changed. In an extremely strange manner, it chased after him. Wu Wei's pupils constricted. The flying knife changed direction. How is that possible? With an explosive holler, Wu Wei's body was like a storm as he retreated. However, he only retreated 50 feet before he felt an intense pain in his right eye. That flying knife, which was as thin as a cicada's wing, smashed his eyeball into pieces and pierced right into his brain. Only by a close shave did the remaining energy dissipate. Using his bones to block the knife, Wu Wei fainted from the intense pain in his brain. Before he recovered, his expression changed once more. It was ashen white, filled with a deathly silence. The saber light that chased from behind exploded out, instantly swallowing his body. However, before he lost consciousness, Wu Wei only had one thought. What a sharp flying knife! How can there be such a godly skill in the world? In the next moment, fresh blood spurted out. It dyed the entire patch of grass blood red. Personally witnessing Wu Wei being sliced into pieces by Yin Yang's knife, Wu Wei felt a sense of relief. Zhong Shou also felt his mind relax, and then his eyes darkened. Just now, he coughed out blood not because he wanted to take the risk to lure this person, but because his body was already at a point where it couldn't take it anymore. After he sent out that last knife, he had totally collapsed. This damn dual meridian body is so weak. As he thought about it in a daze, Zhong Shou felt even dizzier before he totally lost consciousness. When Chu Xue saw that, she immediately stepped forward to support Zhong Shou, preventing him from falling to the ground. Her eyes were slightly weird. Apart from the joy of surviving, there was also a sense of loss. In today's battle, her young master had pretty much used his own strength to decide the outcome. On the contrary, she had become a burden. Chapter 14. Young Master is actually so strong. Will he not want me in the future? Chu Xue furrowed her brows, seriously thinking about such a possibility. On Gantian Mountain there were numerous maids. Most of them were smart and nimble, and there were also many noble people. She was only chosen to be the maid of the prince because she was a dual cultivator, and her strength was a little higher than normal girls of the same age. The more she thought about it, the more dejected she felt. Chu Shue's eyes were in a daze as she looked at the unconscious teen in her arms. When she was at her most desperate, Zhong Shou, who she was supposed to protect, appeared in front of her. She originally thought that there was no hope, but in just a few breaths, he killed Zhong Yu and the others. He forcefully pulled her out from the edge of hell. The heroic posture of him holding a sword and fighting 6 people was deeply imprinted in her heart. She couldn't get rid of it, and she didn't want to forget it. Her eyes slowly became intoxicated, until Yin Yang also took a few steps and arrived beside the two of them. These few people were all killed by the prince alone? Looking closely at the corpses beside the carriages 1,000 feet away. Even if Yin Yang knew what was going on, he couldn't help but take in a deep cold breath. What a fast knife! What a domineering sword! 3 martial warriors and 3 martial masters, all of them took less than 40 breaths of time. Truly impressive. Taking in a deep breath, Yin Yang took out a purple crystal from his bag and placed it between Zhong Shou's brows. When Chu Shui saw the situation, she was annoyed. Uncle Yin, young master, still remembers what happened when he was young. Yin Yang didn't care, shaking his head slightly. Shui, you should be clearer than me about what kind of person this burning sword Wu Wei is. 3 or 4 mythic masters of the same grade could only be slaughtered by him. To be able to take his right eye with a body that has just opened the foundation chakra, how can one not be suspicious? Whether or not the prince is the real person, we have to test it out. In just a short moment, a sky-blue luster lit up on the crystal. The luster was pure and incomparably bright. Yin Yang's eyes lit up as he kept the purple crystal, his mouth exclaiming, "This soul is really pure." The prince's talent in spiritual cultivation is definitely heaven-sent. It was said that when those ascended martial ancestors and spirit masters tried to possess someone, they were most afraid of having an impure soul. They would never allow the original soul to exist. Since the crown prince still has his childhood memories and his spirit is so pure, then he is definitely not possessed. He saw that Chu Shui, who was beside him, was also gradually losing her nervousness. Yin Yang smiled in understanding. Then, he looked at Zhong Shou with an unusually emotional expression. There was anticipation, joy, and a hint of jealousy in his eyes. Since it wasn't the wisdom of your past life, then today's battle was all due to your own ability. He must have practiced some kind of secret technique that we don't know about. That's why he's so powerful. In the past, I only knew that due to the coexistence of 2 meridians, the prince was unable to cultivate any martial path or spiritual cultivation. I didn't know that the prince's martial arts talents were so shocking. Just opening the foundation chakra, and he was able to cross 4 grades and kill martial masters. If the prince can break away from his dual meridian body and become an ascended martial saint, who in this world can match up to him? When Zhong Shou woke up once more, it was already 3 days later. His head felt like it was split into 2. He was dizzy and in extreme pain. When he opened his eyes with much difficulty, he realized that he was lying on Chu Shui's legs on the soft couch in the carriage. "Kiki, this pillow is so comfortable, it smells so good." His mind was intoxicated, and even the pain in his head seemed to have lessened by a lot. Zhong Shou sniffed lightly. In the next moment, he noticed a long red scar in front of his eyes. The body of the tiger cat race was indeed strong. The medicine passed down by the monster race for tens of thousands of years had shocking effect. In such a short period of time, most of the wounds on Chu Shui's body had healed. On her snow-white skin, there were only red scars left. It would probably take a few more days for them to fade. After sleeping for a few days, Zhong Shou felt that the life and death battle was not that long ago. Thinking about those shocking wounds on Chu Shui's body, his heart couldn't help but tremble as he quickly sat up. Then, all the muscles in his body seemed to be torn apart. Zhong Shou couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Chu Shui, who was leaning against the carriage and taking a nap, was also startled awake. She muttered to herself unconsciously, and then stretched herself lazily. In the next moment, she saw Zhong Shou looking at her with a half-smile. Her face instantly turned red as she hurriedly stood up. "Young master, you're awake?" Her voice was filled with surprise. However, Chu Shui's head was lowered, her chin resting on her chest. It was like she wanted to find a place to dig a hole and bury herself in. Zhong Shou broke out into a laugh, feeling weird. Wasn't she really bold when she touched his pulse and massaged his body? Why did she suddenly become so shy? He wanted to tease her, but he knew that with Chu Shui's current state, she wouldn't say anything. If he casually said a few words, she would run away. He could only shake his head and look out of the carriage window. The scenery outside wasn't a desolate plain. Instead, they were walking on a huge path, surrounded by mountains and valleys. However, along the way they saw many people and carriages. They had probably left the Dragon Lake Plains and entered the Sudian mountain range, near the east extreme Cloud Ocean. Not far away should be one of the bases of the top sect in the Donglin Cloud Continent, Pill Spirit Mountain. The Lingyun sect's power spread across the cloud world, and had a total of 9 bases spread across the 5 cloud continents as well as the 4 large cloud islands. The Pill Spirit Mountain was only one of them. Its true headquarters was in a cloud palace that had been left behind since ancient times. In his last life, Zhong Shou was fortunate enough to see it, and it was indeed on a huge scale. Looking at the endless mountains on both sides, Zhong Shou's brows couldn't help but furrow. "Are we still rushing to Pill Spirit Mountain? I heard that Pill Spirit Mountain is hidden in a heavy fog ocean. It would only appear once every 3 years at a specific time. Now isn't the time yet." Chu Shui had already forced herself to calm down, smiling when she heard that. Did young master forget that this year is the year of the hurricane? Calculating the time, there should only be 2 months left. Only then did Zhong Shou remember that all the continents and cloud islands of the cloud world floated above the cloud layer. Roughly every 10 years, there would be large amounts of hurricanes that would rise up from the cloud ocean and sweep all around. The former was due to magnetism, the latter due to temperature differences. However, this was knowledge from the future. At that time, no matter how thick the fog was, it would all be blown away. That would be the time when Pill Spirit Mountain would appear. Curling his lips, Zhong Shou was slightly unwilling. He subconsciously didn't want to go to Pill Spirit Mountain. In his previous life, the grudges with the Soaring Cloud sect in the game were secondary. What was more important was his father, who was known as the Maniac Blood Monster Saint, Nine-Tail Fox King Zhong Weiran. After becoming a martial saint and appearing in the world once more, the 11 ascended martial saints he killed all came from Lingyun sect. Legend had it that because of the death of his beloved son, he wiped out the Sky Fox Zhong family and took his anger out on Lingyun sect, which was why he charged up Pill Spirit Mountain alone, causing numerous experts to fall. In the tens of years after that battle, Lingyun's sect couldn't recover, and their reputation fell greatly. Only at the end of the God Emperor era did they recover some strength. That battle was hailed as a world-shocking battle, shocking many worlds. However, at that time, Zhong Weiran wasn't the Monster King and was traveling alone. Zhong Shou wasn't able to recall that. Zhong Shou didn't know what secrets there were within. He only knew that the Monster King's son fled into Pill Spirit Mountain alone and was then mercilessly chased out by Lingyun sect. That was the reason why he was made into a puppet and hung as a corpse for the public to see. What happened in the Pill Spirit Mountain? Since that Monster King arranged for his son to join Lingyun sect, it definitely wasn't without reason. What was the reason for him to be chased out? Forget it, I'll just go and take a look to find out. Anyways, I'll have to go to Pill Spirit Mountain sooner or later. There are some things that I need to verify. Chapter 15. Zhong Shou laughed. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Things that hadn't happened yet were not easy to mention to Yin Yang and Chu Shui. Anyways, it didn't matter if he went to that place once. The only thing he was sure of was that this trip to Pill Spirit Mountain, even if there wouldn't be any danger, it wouldn't be peaceful. Looking at the clouds, he could see that Sparrow Hawk still circling in the clouds, following him in the sky. Unfortunately, at this moment, he didn't have a suitable bow. The strength of his physical body was also slightly lacking. If not, at this distance, he would only need one arrow to shoot it down. Most of the secrets of the six-god defensive knife technique could be used on other hidden weapons. Naturally, archery was one of them. Chu Shui looked at Zhong Shou's actions, stretching her head out of the window and looking at the clouds. During these few days, Uncle Ian has tried his best to shoot down that eagle. However, it managed to escape several times. There should be another spirit master controlling it, and it isn't far away. However, this is already the Sudian mountain range, so those people most probably won't dare to attack. Although the Lingyun sect was housed in Pill Spirit Mountain, its area of influence included the entire Sudian mountain range, as well as the Dragon Lake Plains outside. It even spread outwards to the various countries and cities of Donglin Cloud Continent. Although one couldn't see anyone from the Lingyun sect here, one couldn't doubt their ability to control the nearby regions. In the 10,000 years since the desolate ancient era, there were numerous precedents that could be used as examples. Especially at this moment when the clouds were about to scatter and numerous young talents who wanted to join the Pill Spirit Mountain gathered at the foot of the mountain. No one would take the risk to challenge the prestige of the Lingyun sect at such a time. Expressionlessly looking at the eagle, Zhong Shou didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, he was attracted by the red marks on Chu Shui's skin. His heart moved slightly as Zhong Shou held Chu Shui's hand and gently kissed the red marks. "Does it still hurt here?" Chu Shui was so flustered that she didn't know what to do. She tried to break free, but she couldn't. She could only shake her head with her cheeks flushed red. She said in a weak voice, "It doesn't hurt, young master." In fact, Chu Shui had suffered more serious injuries in the past, but she was still fine. Master always said that Shui was like weeds. No matter how you cut it, it would always grow back. Moreover, my injuries can't be compared to young master's. Weeds? Zhong Shou was slightly startled. Looking at Chu Shui's beautiful face, he couldn't help but secretly laugh. He wondered where this Shui's master came from. It was quite interesting. Hearing Chu Shui's words, she must have suffered a lot in these 3 years. At the very least, being injured was a common occurrence. This time, if he hadn't taken over Zhong Shou's body, he would have died. He probably died 3 days ago. And this cat-eared girl was only 13 years old. Fate was cruel, no less than Zhong Shou from before. Sighing to himself, Zhong Shou felt a sense of pity rise up in his chest. "I am a guy, a person made of mud. How can I be compared to a girl? In the future, you don't have to bear with the pain. Oh right, you are my maidservant. In the future, no one will be able to hurt you." He kissed the red marks, only to feel that her skin was like cream, smooth like it was forged. Zhong Shou couldn't help but lick it once more. The texture was really good. Su Chuxue felt like she was electrocuted, her true qi exploding out, and she was finally able to break free. Then, she dashed out of the carriage like lightning. Zhong Shou didn't stop her. He sat on the soft couch and smiled. "Shui, don't forget that these 2 days are the medicinal bath. Have you prepared those medicinal herbs?" Outside the carriage, there was a loud clanging sound, like a heavy object had fallen to the ground. Zhong Shou couldn't help but laugh out loud, extremely delighted. After the laughter, Zhong Shou's face regained its coldness, and he started to check the situation of his body. The situation was better than he had expected. The last knife he had shot out had used up all the energy in his body. However, it also prevented the true qi within his chakra from clashing. No wonder he could wake up in less than 3 days. However, His current situation was still not optimistic. Zhong Shou realized that he had fallen into a vicious circle. In the future, the more his cultivation improved, the stronger his body would be. The conflict between his two bloodlines would become even more intense. If he continued to train and cultivate, before he could break out of the chakra realm, he would die from internal injuries, unless there was an even stronger power that could suppress the two or mediate between them. Speaking of which, I can only choose to cultivate both spirit and martial arts. However, this spirit master method, it seems like I need to find a chance to build my soul ocean. Muttering softly, Zhong Shou's brows slowly furrowed. In his last life, in the game, he had created a few characters to cultivate spiritual technique. However, on this aspect, he spent too little time, and his achievements weren't what he wanted. Only his talisman and formation studies were passable, barely reaching the level of a grandmaster. After all, just a martial cultivation path was vast and unfathomable. It was tough to find the source of it. In his last life, how would he have the heart to cultivate spiritual techniques? However, today he had no choice. Unfortunately, he didn't even have time to read the book of Ian Extreme Life that he had obtained before he went back in time 10,000 years ago. These two books of the universe were one of the top spirit master cultivation techniques in the millions of world. Since ancient times, it was known as Ian, the four directions were known as universe. The universe book contained the path of space. The book of Ian recorded the path of time. Even if the God Emperor game couldn't truly record this book that had disappeared for a long time. Most of them recorded the rough theory as well as the deductions of numerous experts in the future regarding this top-grade spell secret manual. If he could take a look at it, it would be of huge help to his spiritual cultivation. Sighing, Zhong Shou took out the pine pattern wind sword. The quality of this sword was really good. After killing 4 people and going through the corrosion of the heavens swallowing energy conversion technique, it was still as tough as before, giving off a cold glow. Flicking his finger, he confirmed that there were no hidden injuries within the sword body. Zhong Shou bore with the pain in his body, taking simple and quick steps as he started to train. The time for leisure was over, and now it was time for him to work hard. At this moment, although Zhong Yu was dead, the danger hadn't been solved. Moreover, he didn't bother about this person. What he paid attention to was the next monster king, the one who hung his corpse for months after he was beheaded. The trip to Pill Spirit Mountain would probably be a tough one, which was why in his eyes, even if it was just a little bit of time wasted, he couldn't tolerate it. This time, after just a moment of training, Zhong Shou felt that it was different. In the past, when he controlled this body, he always felt that it wasn't smooth, like there was a thin layer between his soul and the body. However, after merging with those 13 years of memories, this phenomenon seemed to have totally disappeared. At this moment, when he trained in the sword, he was able to follow his heart. His footsteps and the sword in his hand were all more precise. The battle 3 days ago was the same. If it wasn't for him being able to control his body, he definitely wouldn't have been able to kill those few people so cleanly. He also wouldn't have been able to shoot out that last knife. Although this Zhong Shou can't train in martial arts, his foundations are really good. As he was unable to open up his chakra meridians, the person before him could only train in these basic techniques day after day. Even after 3 years, he didn't train much. Picking it up now was also really easy. Even if there were some areas that were wrong and he wasn't satisfied, he still needed to make some changes. As for Zhong Shou's path of martial arts, be it the last life or the future, the most important thing was the foundations. Only with a stable foundation could one build a 100,000-foot tall building. Chapter 16. Roughly 6 days later, in the afternoon, the carriage that the 3 of them sat on entered a small town filled with inns and restaurants. This place was called Haze Town, surrounded by mountains and numerous beasts. It wasn't a good place to stay. However, not far from here, past the heavy clouds, was Lingyun Sek's base in Donglin Cloud Continent, Pill Spirit Mountain. Every time the 3-year period came to an end, there would be a burst of abnormal prosperity. It would allow the merchants here to earn a huge amount. When the 3 of them arrived, there were already 30,000 people gathered here. They were all below 18 years old, rushing here from far away. Many of them had some strength and identity. In the next 2 months, no less than 60,000 people would gather here. They would fight for the less than 600 spots in Lingyun Sek. The 3 of them were like a water droplet merging into the ocean, unassuming. Entering the town, Zhongshou couldn't help but want to laugh. In the God Emperor game, this place was specially arranged as the beginner region of Lingyun Sek. All the new disciples needed to train here. Every day, one could see hundreds of thousands of Lingyun sect outer disciples running quests, killing monsters and leveling up in this small region. They pretty much caused this small canyon to explode. He had come to this place several times before. Looking at the familiar buildings around, he felt a sense of nostalgia. On the north side of the town, they found a relatively clean inn to stay in. Zhongshou greeted Yin Yang and brought Chu Shui onto the street. They looked like they were casually strolling, but after passing through a few alleys, they arrived at a market. Due to the sudden influx of people in this small town, this place became really prosperous, shoulders rubbing against each other. Looking out, one could see that there were tens to hundreds of stalls on both sides. Most of them were selling weapons and clothing, talismans, and some pills. There were also martial arts and spells, the most common and basic ones. One could even see a few famous merchants among them. Zhongshou looked around like he was looking at flowers on horseback. When he walked in front of a bookstall, he couldn't help but break out into a laugh. On top of it, there were many small manuscripts, such as collection of past examination of Soaring Cloud Sect's disciples and Soaring Cloud Sect's 12 methods of bone examination. In his previous life, he had thought that it was created by players. Unexpectedly, there were similar booklets being sold as early as 10,000 years ago. He directly walked past, all the way to the end of the street, in front of an unassuming shop before he stepped in. Chu Shui followed behind. She blinked in surprise before following him inside. This was a shop that specialized in Spirit Master artifacts. What was the Crown Prince doing here? The items here were clearly of different grades and were specially opened for the Lingyun Sect's Spirit Master disciples. Zhongshou only cultivated martial arts, while she cultivated both martial arts and spiritual art. However, most of the things here were of no use to her. Zhongshou casually bought some talisman paper, high-grade sandalwood incense, blood ink cinnabar for drawing talismans, and some purple beast spirit stones from demonic beasts. After that, he stood in front of a wooden rack filled with metal cans. Most of these cans were the size of a fist. They were either made of star steel stone or completely made of brass. They were all materials that could block out spiritual energy. Some of the more special ones had special materials added in, all different colors. At the ceiling area, there were labels that wrote Metal Swallowing Beast, 3 Essence Ice Soul, Spirit Cloud Bird, etc. Young Master. These are all protector beasts and need spiritual energy to activate them. Just as Chushua reminded him, she remembered that her young master had also learned the path of a spirit master in Linhai College. There was no need to remind him of such common knowledge. Zhongshou acknowledged, his eyes looking around. The glow in his eyes became brighter and brighter. Legend had it that it was one of the strongest protector beasts of the God Emperor era. It was the only one that rose from the lowest grade to the celestial grade. It was that person who found it in Haze Town. After that, he only used a mere 60 years to complete the process of soaring to the heavens and become famous throughout the cloud world. At the start of the God Emperor game, many people came here to pay their respects. Unfortunately, this item was set as not for sale by the system. When that person appeared, they could only look at it to satisfy their cravings. Who knows what the situation would be like 10,000 years ago in the real world? There were still 10 years until that person appeared. Was this item already here? In just a moment, Zhong Shou's eyes locked onto a wooden can. The material was the most basic iron wood. There were some talismans carved on it as a seal. However, on the label, there were the words Quicksilver Beast King, which was a little scary. As expected, this item was here. Suppressing the joy in his heart, Zhong Shou reached out and picked up the iron wood can. Then, he casually waved his hand and a 30-year-old shop assistant walked over. Looking at the item in Zhong Shou's hand, he was startled. He hesitated slightly before reminding, "Guest, this item has been in my shop for 7 years and no one has asked about it. Don't look at how nice the name is and how it has the title of Beast King. It is actually a muddy water beast that mutated slightly and can barely be considered a grade 1 spirit beast. A spirit master can only raise 10 to 20 protector beasts in their life. Once you choose, you can't change it. Guest, please be careful." When Zhong Shou heard that, he smiled without caring at all. He thought to himself that the merchants of ancient times were all honest. How could they be as cunning as those in the future? Taking out 3 grade 2 beast crystals to pay, Zhong Shou turned around and looked at Chu Shui. "Do you see any protector beasts that you are satisfied with? Do you want to buy them too?" Chu Shui shook her head and politely declined. Her master said that she was talented and would definitely be able to enter the Xiantian realm. She even had hopes of reaching the Ascended realm, which was why she was so ambitious. Although the protector beasts sold here were not bad, they were far from what she wanted. She also made up her mind that if Zhong Shou wanted to make this muddy water beast king his protector beast, she had to persuade him not to destroy his own future. Walking out of the shop, Zhong Shou had no destination and just strolled around aimlessly. After a few hours, he bought a full bag of metal. It weighed 80 kilograms and was carried by Chu Shui. He also exchanged for some wind element beast crystals as well as tens of copper mirrors. Only when the sun set did he return to the inn he was staying in. He was ashamed to say that as a man, his strength was far from Chu Shui's. Even after walking for tens of steps, he was panting. The moment he entered his room, Zhong Shou took out the ironwood jar. After opening the lid, he used the pine pattern wind sword to cut a grade 1 beast crystal and a piece of red copper into pieces. Then, he mixed them with a few drops of his blood and threw them into the jar. Then, he pasted the talisman onto the jar. At this moment, his soul ocean wasn't formed and it wasn't time for him to subdue this item. However, he could start the daily training of it. When that person obtained this item, he didn't know what it was and didn't pay much attention to it. Only a few years later did this future top-grade protector beast start to shine. However, now that he knew the ability of this item, how could he be like that person and not bother about it? As the son of the Monster King, the wealth and resources that he could use were far from what that person could compare to. This beast's future ability was extraordinary. When it just entered grade 2, it had a strong ability. However, due to the lack of training in the early years, after it charged into the celestial martial realm, it wasn't able to improve by half a step. Numerous people in the future felt that it was a pity. Now that it landed in his hands, he could make up for this regret. Following which, Zhong Shou took out a small basin. He poured the blood ink that he had bought into it. This was made from the blood of spirit beasts that were filled with spiritual energy, and the smell of blood was really strong. Zhong Shou didn't care, mixing in the cinnabar and mixing it together until it was even. He stood up and started to draw talisman patterns on the floor of the guest room. In about half a quarter of an hour, the outline of a circular raiment formation had already appeared. Chapter 17. A total of 6 Grade 1 purple beast spirit stones were placed all around, each occupying an area. On the windowsill, there were 6 bronze mirrors that reflected the moonlight into the room. Zhong Shou sat at the center of this room that was filled with blood runes. He looked around and carefully checked to see if he missed anything. The puppet formation was drawn to defend against evil and the wind that was everywhere in the world. When spirit masters formed their soul ocean, what they were most afraid of was attracting evil spirits and evil spirits. Often, if they weren't careful, their soul would be taken away and they would become totally dumb. As for those purple beast spirit stones, they were made of a special kind of stone that sealed the soul essences of spirit beasts. It was originally a material that spirit masters used to craft weapons and cast spells, but now it was used by Zhong Shou as a source of soul power. The heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique was not only used in the martial path, but it also had a similar effect on the spirit master's chanting. The path of the heavens was to take what was in excess and make up for what was in deficiency. As long as it was something that was stronger than one's, the energy-swallowing technique could be used to snatch it. This was why it was seen as the top evil technique by the later generations and was placed in the demon path. Using 6 soul stones at once was what Zhong Shou had high hopes for himself. Spirit masters also paid attention to their foundations, and the quality and size of their soul ocean would directly decide their future achievements. With the experience of cultivation from his previous life and the heaven-devouring energy conversion technique in his hands, he was naturally ambitious with such conditions. All the talismans were correct, and Yin Yang and Chu Shui wouldn't disturb him at this moment. Zhong Shou directly cut open his middle finger, scattering tens of drops of blood all around. When the entire puppet formation shone with spiritual light, Zhong Shou used the heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique and swallowed the 6 soul stones around him. It caused the 6 beast spirit stones to give out a purple glow. From weak to strong, threads of soul power under the buff of the puppet formation injected into Zhong Shou's brow. However, Zhong Shou only absorbed for a moment before the talismans on the soul stones started to break apart. 6 tiger roars sounded in his ears one after another. At the same time, the beast spirit stones around him exploded into pieces. A wisp of purple smoke flew out from each of them. In just an instant they each took the form of a tiger. All of them were nearly 10 feet tall and looked ferocious. It opened its bloody mouth and roared at Zhong Shou, as if it was going to pounce on him at any moment. They are all dead beasts unwilling to be slaughtered. Could it be that they still want to hurt people? Zhong Shou sneered. A rank 1 beast soul was unable to harm anyone. It could only intimidate or attack with soul power. Naturally, Power's soul was pitifully small. However, if the person using this technique was unable to maintain his composure, or if his mind was shaken, or if he was unable to withstand the impact of these beast spirits, he would still face the risk of death. Zhong Shou knew that he would never make such a mistake. In his previous life, in order to practice martial arts in the real world, he had experienced countless difficulties and hardship. In this life, pretty much every day, he had to experience the pain of bloodline conflict. His mental state was even stronger than those ascended realm experts. Naturally, he wasn't afraid of some external evils. Soul power was still forcefully extracted from the beast spirit stones thread by thread and directed into the Shunshao acupoint at the center of his brows. Zhong Shou also started to focus and sink into his mind. Normally, when spirit masters cultivated, they used the chakra meridian as the foundation. Meditating every day, after accumulating enough soul power and spiritual energy in the mind chakra at the head, they would build up the soul ocean. The entire process, depending on one's talent, would take anywhere from a month to 3 years. Zhong Shou was unable to practice martial arts, so becoming a spirit master was also a way out. However, the 2 mind chakras at the head were still a hurdle that couldn't be avoided. After wasting 3 years, he still didn't achieve anything. At this moment, with the 6 beast spirit stones as the source of soul power, Zhong Shou directly skipped the accumulation process and chose to directly build up the soul ocean. The spiritual energy from all around, as well as the soul power that was forcefully extracted, was directly charged into his soul from the Shunshao acupoint. Zhong Shou skillfully condensed it into a point while drawing various talismans within. A total of 36 talismans were hidden within. However, he could feel that there was a repulsive force under the energy ocean that was interfering with the gathering of his spiritual energy. This was the conflict between internal energy and soul power. Zhong Shou had expected it, but at this moment it was extremely weak and could be totally ignored. When the soul power and spiritual energy were all compressed to the extreme, it suddenly exploded out. When it formed once more, it formed a whirlpool-like purple ball of energy. This was the so-called soul ocean. From now on, his soul had a true core, and was the foundation of a spirit master's cultivation. However, at this moment, it was far from being worthy of the word "sea." It could only be said to be a true soul seed that needed a lot of effort to grow. Zhong Shou heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed his mind. The entire process sounded really simple. However, from ancient times till now, numerous people who cultivated spells all fell at this step. However, when he continued to meditate, he felt a little worried. Who knew if it was because his soul ocean had a portion of the heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique's specialty mixed in? The soul ocean that was formed wasn't the pellet shape of a normal person, but a small whirlpool. Not only was it swallowing spiritual energy from all around, but it was also absorbing the scattered spiritual energy. The amount was really small, not even a drop in the ocean when he used the energy-swallowing technique. However, at every moment, there would be new spiritual energy that would merge into his soul without any restraint. He felt a little regretful. He didn't know if such a mutation was good or bad. Without purposely controlling it, I can automatically swallow spiritual energy and spiritual energy. Isn't that the same as meditating at every moment? However, when a spirit master cultivates, the most important thing is the purity of the soul. Using the energy-swallowing technique to cultivate the path of a spirit master is something that I have no choice about. Forget it, anyways there is a way to solve this. At most, I will have to suffer a little more. Sighing bitterly, a sharp glow appeared in Zhong Shou's eyes. With a heavy scoff, the 6 green tigers that were forcefully sucked dry couldn't take it anymore. They turned into a ball of green smoke, turning from thick to thin. When he looked out of the window, he saw that the moon was hanging high in the night sky. Unknowingly, 4 hours have already passed. Now that midnight is about to arrive, it is the right time. Building the soul ocean was something that would happen naturally. At this moment, it was the most crucial moment. He took out a total of 9 high-grade sandalwood incense sticks, burning them one by one before sticking them in front of his body. Zhong Shou closed his eyes once more and started to visualize. Using the 12-layer of the building method, he imagined that his soul was climbing up layer by layer. When he reached the last layer, Zhong Shou shouted out once more, "Out of body!" Instantly, a light smoke drilled out from the back of Zhong Shou's head. It was indiscernible and couldn't be seen, only the center area was slightly thicker. At the same time, countless soul essences and evil spirits of different sizes appeared outside the ray's formation. They were all staring aggressively, continuously attacking. However, they were all blocked outside by balls of purple light. There was also the wind of heaven and earth that blew in from the outside, seeping in bit by bit. Zhong Shou's soul just slightly touched it and it shook intensely, nearly collapsing. What a fierce gale! Even after being blocked by my formation, it still has such strength. 10,000 years ago, the environment of heaven and earth was actually so bad. No wonder in ancient times, when spirit masters cultivated, they had to complete the focus concentration, soul illumination, and spirit cultivation steps before they could truly go out of body. Using all his strength, Zhong Shou gathered his soul and shrunk it into a ball, hanging half an inch above his body as he waited quietly. Just right after midnight, he saw the moonlight reflected in the 6 copper mirrors slowly gather at one point. At the center of the 6 beams of moonlight was Zhong Shou's soul. After an instant, traces of the sun essence flame were faintly discernible. Chapter 18. At this moment, Zhong Shou felt like his entire body was in flames. The flames of the sun were pure and intense, the best external power to refine the soul. However, apart from those top spirit cultivators, as long as the soul of the other cultivators was shown by the sun, it would scatter. Therefore, the vast majority of cultivators before the return to Yang stage would use moonlight, which had been weakened by countless times, as a supplement to cultivate. Using the copper mirror to reflect the moonlight could also gather the essence flames of the sun. However, compared to the moonlight, it was several times weaker. This was a method that was only thought of 6,000 years later. Relying on the heavenly mirror soul shining technique, the creator of this technique was able to advance step by step, almost reaching the peak of the spirit master realm, despite having an average aptitude. During the era that Zhong Shou lived in, this technique was spread all over and pretty much everyone knew about it. However, at that time, the spiritual energy around was really weak, and there were very few spirit masters who had some achievements. At this moment, this technique could make up for the weakness of the heaven energy swallowing conversion technique. The copper mirror was blurry, and the reflection wasn't too strong. The moonlight was like water and the glow was really cold. However, when it shone on Zhong Shou's soul, it caused half of his soul, which was like smoke and mist, to disappear. The remaining half also shook intensely. Just as it was about to be destroyed, 9 sandalwood incense rose up from below. The green smoke wrapped Zhong Shou's soul within, stabilizing it once more. So hot. Like my entire body is about to burn up. Luckily, this time I didn't get careless and prepared sandalwood incense to stabilize my soul. Hey! These 6 copper mirrors were already like that. Who knew what kind of pain the real heavenly mirror soul shining technique would bring? In the past, I really underestimated those spirit masters. The true heavenly mirror soul illumination technique used the radiant mirror, which appeared in the future as a magical artifact. It could be said that even the slightest detail could be seen. Just these 6 copper mirrors were the minimum requirement to be able to gather the essence flames of the sun. However, even so, it made Zhong Shou feel like his soul was melting under the shine of the moon. Midnight was the time when the essence sun fire was the weakest. Half an hour later, it would rise again. Zhong Shou didn't dare to delay any longer. He controlled himself with his consciousness and sent the seed of true soul, which had just been condensed, into the center of the essence sun fire. Following which, the impurities that had entered his Yuan soul due to his Yuan spirit swallowing technique turned into wisps of smoke that rose and disappeared. Even the remaining portion had completely merged with his soul. Until this seed no longer had any other colors. It was deep purple and resplendent like a gem. Zhong Shou's soul remembrance then sank into his body from the back of his head. At this moment, Zhong Shou felt that his 5 senses had become 10 times sharper. Within 100 meters, all the falling leaves and chirping insects were within his grasp. Zhong Shou didn't care much about it. He knew that this was a temporary phenomenon after the true soul seed was successfully constructed. After one night, it would slowly fade away. He hurriedly swallowed a pill that he had prepared and took in a deep breath, inhaling the 9 wisps of sandalwood into his lungs. In the next moment, an intense pain struck the back of his head. It was so painful that he wished he was dead. The muscles in his 4 limbs were weak and powerless. This was a symptom of his soul being consumed too much. This was the price he had to pay for using the sky mirror soul shining technique. Fortunately, the pill in his abdomen gave him a refreshing feeling in time. The sandalwood also had the effect of nourishing the soul, slightly reducing the pain. A moment later, Zhong Shou had slowly gotten used to it. He placed a blue crystal at the center of his brows. Looking at the almost flawless purple light within, he couldn't help but smile. This time, he was willing to take a huge risk and cultivate with the heavenly mirror soul illuminating technique. Although he almost died, the gains were far above his expectations. If we're just talking about purity, wouldn't my current soul be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with those return-to-sun-level spirit masters? The soul injury would take a long time to heal, needing 7 to 8 days. However, 2 months should be enough. When the Lingyun sect opens, not only will the foundation chakra be completed, spirit master cultivation can also reach the spirit calming realm. A few minutes later, along with the moon in the sky shifting, the moonlight reflected by the 6 copper mirrors also slowly shifted away. Zhong Shou waited for his stamina to slightly recover. He stood up and started to pack up the talismans and artifacts in the room. Not long after he made his move, a voice sounded in his ears. "Brother Yin, although you are working for the ruler, you are still a human and also a descendant of a famous sect. Why do you want to interfere in the internal conflicts of Gantian Mountain? Isn't it better for you to leave now?" "Leave now?" Feng Shao, I wonder who taught you to say these words? Was it Zhong Shi, Zhong Yang, or that Zhong Xiuan? The ruler was wrong about you. Before this, I was finding it weird. How did that Zhong Yu know where the prince was? Zhong Shou originally didn't care much, but when those words entered his ears, his actions stopped. Just by slightly distinguishing, he knew that the voice came from a bridge 600 feet away from the inn. This voice belongs to Yin Yang. Where did the other person come from? Listening to his words, he seems to be my father's subordinate. His brows furrowing, Zhong Shou listened carefully. However, that Feng Shao kept silent for a long while before he said expressionlessly, "It is young Master Zhong Shi. After all, the ruler has already died, but we still need to live well. With the prince's ability, even if he becomes the monster king of Gantian Mountain, it will only harm him. Brother Yin, why are you so stubborn? As expected, it is him. Feng Shao, you have some foresight. This plan of borrowing a knife to kill is not bad. Who knows that young Master Zhong Shi is prepared to let the prince return to Gantian Mountain to be his puppet? Or does he want the prince to die outside of Gantian Mountain?" Feng Shao laughed coldly, his voice filled with pride. "My young Master Zhong Shi is known as the top talent of the Skyfox Zhong family after the ruler. He is not even 20 and has already broken through the bodily chakra realm and stepped into the Xiantian realm. He was praised by many elders of the Zhong family. He can subdue the various races of Gantian Mountain with his own strength, so why would he need a puppet? If you can bring the prince far away and not enter the cloud world, young master will take into account their brotherhood and let him live. However, if he doesn't know what is good for him and still wants the monster king position of Gantian Mountain, even if young master is merciful, he has to take his life." This time, it was Yin Yang's turn to keep silent. That voice continued, "Brother Yin, the oath you made was to serve Gantian Mountain until you die. Why must you hang yourself on a dead tree? What future does following that Zhong Shou have? I know you want to bring the prince to join Lingyun, but in my eyes, you might not be able to get what you want. If you follow my young master, you might be able to protect the prince." Before he finished, he was interrupted by Yin Yang's cold laugh. "You don't have to say any more. People of different paths can't work together. Since I, Yin Yang, have decided on the prince, I won't join anyone else. I have no regrets even if I die 100 times. Scoff, I am ashamed to be on the same side as someone who betrays his master." After he finished, Yin Yang waved his sleeves and left without hesitation. Zhong Shou shook his head slightly, not bothering about the situation on the other side. Thinking to himself, he really didn't know whether to call Yin Yang loyal or stubborn. Actually, the method that Feng Xiao spoke of might be a good one. If he said those words, wouldn't he totally cut off his path of retreat? Following which, he recalled that after he was chased out of Lingyun Mountain, Zhong Yang and Zhong Xuan made him the monster king of Gantian Mountain. It only lasted for a few short years before it was overthrown by Zhong Shi. Hearing Feng Xiao's tone, it was like he had predicted the outcome of the three of them. Interesting. Zhong Shou didn't get angry and instead laughed. The depths of his eyes turned cold once more. Chapter 19. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye 2 months had passed. Zhong Shou was getting more and more used to the life 10,000 years ago. However, apart from occasionally strolling, collecting the daily cultivation materials of the spirit masters, as well as the herbs and materials needed by the Quicksilver Beast King, and occasionally teasing his maids, the rest of the time, he would stay in his room and train his basic sword techniques, basic footwork, and basic movement technique. Yin Yang and Chu Shui were the same, trying not to go out and cause trouble. At this moment, there were already 100,000 people gathered in this haze town. There were all sorts of people, and most of them were young and full of vigor. Even with the deterrence of the Lingyun sect, it was still a little chaotic, and fights broke out. However, no one dared to kill them. The three of them had special identities, so naturally, they didn't want to cause trouble here. In these 2 months, what made Zhong Shou the happiest was that Yin Yang and Chu Shui both had small improvements in their cultivation. After the battle with Burning Sword Wu Wei, Yin Yang had directly opened his 8th chakra meridian, becoming a mid-grade mythic master. As for Chu Shui, who knew how much her soul had improved. However, her true qi had obviously reached the peak of the martial master realm. She was even a little stronger than Zhong Yu. Zhong Shou couldn't help but feel happy. Yin Yang and Chu Shui could be considered loyal servants. In this world, they were the only people he could trust. With their strength increasing, it naturally meant that his chances of survival had also increased. Even Chu Shui was delighted. A dual cultivator, to improve beyond this level was as hard as ascending to the heavens. Every little bit of progress was precious. Only Yin Yang, after killing Wu Wei, the worry that had just disappeared returned to his face, and it was getting darker and darker by the day. Yin Yang didn't tell him about his conversation with Feng Xiao that night, so Zhong Shou acted like he didn't know and didn't ask about it. He only became more and more diligent in his daily practice. Inside the bathtub, the water rippled and the steam rose. Zhong Shou was naked, sitting lazily in the middle. Behind him, Chu Shui was sweating profusely. Her 10 fingers were constantly massaging Zhong Shou's meridians and acupuncture point. He seemed to dislike Zhong Shou's appearance and used a lot of force, leaving red marks all over Zhong Shou's back. Young Master has already cultivated the foundation chakra and a small part of the breath chakra. He had already made some progress in qi refinement. For the next medicinal bath, there was no need for Shui. He could do it himself. Later on, Shui will teach young Master a breathing and internal cultivation method, which can also refine the medicinal power of this 5 ginseng blood strengthening soup. Speaking of Zhong Shou's chakra meridians, Chu Shui was deeply shocked. She didn't know what method Zhong Shou used. He was just cultivating the basic qi refinement technique passed down in the Zhong family. However, in a short 2 months, he had opened up 24 acupoints in the foundation chakra. Along with his dual meridian body, it was 48. In terms of the breath chakra, he had also completed a portion of it. Not to mention martial warriors of the same grade, even those at the peak of 3 meridians would be slightly weaker in terms of internal energy. His foundations were firm and strong, far surpassing any martial artist in the world. With such strong internal energy, he didn't need her help to absorb and digest the medicine himself. Who knew that Zhong Shou would directly shake his head, saying in an extremely straightforward manner, breathing and internal cultivation method. I don't want to learn it. Shui is enough to help me. He thought to himself, why did he have to work so hard to absorb and refine this 5 ginseng blood-strengthening soup? Although in terms of effectiveness, his energy-swallowing technique and internal breathing-leading technique were much stronger than Shui's. However, every 10 days there would be a beautiful woman accompanying him in the bath. Where would he go to find such benefits? Chu Shui's true energy nearly went astray. Luckily, in these 2 months, she had some understanding of the young master's personality and was immune to it. Her face was cold as she said, no matter if young master learns it or not, Shui won't accompany young master to bathe next time. You have to keep your word. In her heart, she made up her mind to not help this perverted young master massage his meridians. Zhong Shou gave a flat "oh," his expression still looking bored and lazy. The corner of his lips curled up. That's fine too. However, your young master originally wanted to teach Shui the basic sword techniques I learned. Haze, what a waste! His tone was filled with regret. Chu Shui's eyes lit up. Basic sword techniques were similar to each other in every sect. However, to be able to use it so well like Zhong Shou was something she had never seen before. In these few days, when she sparred with Zhong Shou, she would always lose within a few rounds. No matter how exquisite the sword moves were, in front of Zhong Shou, there was nothing special about them, and he could easily break them. From the beginning to the end, it was the most basic set of sword moves. What she envied the most was the essence of the sword path and the changes it contained. Her heart wavered. In the next moment, Chu Shui's cheeks flushed red. She slapped heavily on Zhong Shou's back, dispersing the last bit of medicinal power of the 5 ginseng blood-strengthening soup. She got up and wrapped her clothes, flying out of the door. After a few breaths, Chu Shui's voice spread out from outside, "Young master, you rascal." Her tone was filled with anger, but along with her soft and sweet voice, it didn't have much killing power. Zhong Shou grinned, directly activating the energy-swallowing technique to absorb all the remaining medicinal essence in the medicinal liquid. It turned into pure essence energy and stored in his body. In total, he used less than a few breaths. Unfortunately, the Sky Mirror Soul Shining technique can't be used on the chakra meridians. If only I could borrow the essence flames of the sun to purify my true qi. My cultivation would be able to increase by another grade, and I would be able to complete the 2nd chakra meridian. Every time he used the heaven-swallowing energy conversion technique, the continuous refining and purifying process used up too much of Zhong Shou's time. If it wasn't for him being worried that his true qi would be too mixed and leave behind too many problems in the future. Even if he broke through to the martial warrior realm, he might be able to do it. On the contrary, his soul power cultivation progress was catching up from behind. The Sky Mirror Soul Shining technique had increased from 6 to 12. Every 7 days, the window of the guest room would be filled with closely packed copper mirrors. Today, he had already completed the focused spirit realm cultivation. Spirit Master grades were relatively simple. However, below God Master, there were 9 grades. Focused Spirit, Observing Soul, Spirit Cultivation, Out of Body, Night Wandering, Return to Sun, Day Wandering, Body Shaping, and True Image. At the start of soul power cultivation, the soul was extremely unstable and ethereal, constantly dissipating. The so-called first stage of focused spirit, as the name suggested, was to stabilize the soul. Since Zhong Shou had created the true soul spiritual seed, he had been using it to go against the astral wind. He also used the essence flames of the sun in the middle of the moon to continuously refine it. Actually, he had completed this process long ago. What he lacked was just the amount of soul power. Only today did he meet the requirements and could proceed to the next step of cultivation. Moving the wooden bucket to the side, Zhong Shou started to feed the mutated mutant sticky water beast in the iron wooden can as usual. At this moment, apart from the quality of the ores, which had increased by 1 grade, the beast crystal had increased to grade 2. Hearing the cracking sounds from within, Zhong Shou's eyes lit up. A smile appeared on Zhong Shou's face. In a few more days, with the soul power he had accumulated, he would be able to tame this future protector spirit beast. In roughly half a month, this beast would be able to evolve to grade 2 and have the ability to make people envious. However, when he looked at the remaining tens of beast crystals in his bag, a helpless expression appeared on Zhong Shou's face. Cultivating energy techniques and feeding spirit beasts had caused his wealth to shrink rapidly. If he didn't replenish it, sooner or later it would be used up. Oh? This wind doesn't seem right? Zhong Shou suddenly stepped forward, welcoming the breeze that blew in from outside as he walked to the front of the window. In the next moment, he saw a commotion on the streets outside. There were even people crazily running and shouting, "The wind is blowing! Ling Yun's sect is about to open." Chapter 20. The wind is finally blowing, haha. I've waited for 2 months in this damn place. Idiot, a storm is coming, why aren't you running? For a moment, the street was in chaos. Chickens flew and dogs jumped, wolves ran and boars rushed. In the blink of an eye, the streets that were packed with people not long ago were empty, only leaving behind a mess. Zhong Shou looked into the distance once more. As expected, those dense clouds were slowly floating into the distance. Along with the wind blowing stronger and stronger, the giant mountain that was hidden in the clouds all year round finally showed signs of itself. However, on the south of this place, a patch of black clouds floated over along with the wind. Lightning flashed, and rumbling thunder could be heard. Zhong Shou's expression slowly turned to one of melancholy. At this time again, was she dancing in the wind at the peak of Xing Mountain? This habit was said to have started 100 years before the God-Emperor era. Thinking back to his memories, that extremely elegant and enchanting figure, Zhong Shou couldn't help but be startled. After a long while, Zhong Shou's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Yin Yang walked in from outside. He had a huge knife by his waist, and his entire body was well dressed. He wore a martial master robe on the outside, looking really majestic. Unfortunately, his face was still cold and stiff. "Prince, it's time for us to move. If we delay, things will change. We can't wait here anymore." Braving the heavy rain, the carriage was the first to leave the mountain. Swiftly moving in the wind, the 16 cloud-stepping foals were obviously against it, giving out unhappy neigh sounds. However, under the control of Yin Yang, they all obediently moved at the front. The body of the carriage was also tilted under the wind. Luckily, the tripod formation at the bottom of the carriage was effective, able to stabilize the carriage before it toppled over. After passing through a dense forest with a circumference of over 100 miles, they flew over a large river that was over 3,000 feet wide. The carriage finally arrived at the foot of a majestic mountain. The first thing that entered their eyes was an incomparably huge mountain gate. The stone door was 900 meters tall, and it was made up of 18 enormous stone pillars. The entire pillar was made of dark green spiritual jade, and it was engraved with various relief carvings. It appeared incomparably grand and gorgeous. The staircase inside was also made of stone and was extremely wide. He showed off the dominance of the top sect of the Donglin Cloud World. "This is Danling Mountain? It's so big." Chu Shui and Zhong Shou jumped off the cloud crossing carriage and tried to look up at the top of the mountain. However, it was hidden in the clouds, making it impossible to see its true appearance. "This place is at least 3 times bigger than Argantian Mountain." No, at least 5 times. As expected of the Soaring Cloud sect, Zhong Shou was secretly surprised. What did the size of the Pill Spirit Mountain have to do with the Soaring Cloud sect? He scoffed coldly. This Pill Spirit Mountain is huge, but it's too huge. However, the height of a mountain does not matter. As long as it has an immortal, it will be famous. The depth of a water does not matter. As long as it has a dragon, it will be spiritual. His words paused as he recalled that this mountain did indeed have experts who were the closest to celestials guarding it. On their Gantian mountain, apart from those few people, they didn't have any talent. He could only pout and look at the top of the mountain in disdain. He didn't have the confidence to say those words. He remembered that when he entered the God Emperor game and was still a newbie, many Soaring Cloud sect disciples stole kills and even killed him for his treasures. After which, he went all out with the top sect in the east of the Cloud World. The number of Soaring Cloud sect disciples that died in his hands was probably around 100,000. After he mastered his martial arts, he charged into the Cloud Palace and fought with the sect leader for a day and a night. Although he had no choice but to escape in the end, he lost honorably. Speaking of which, in his last life, he had many grievances with the Soaring Cloud sect. Anyways, no matter what, he just didn't like it. However, those feats in the past were all in the game. At this moment, in front of the Soaring Cloud sect, he was like an ant under the feet of a giant. They didn't even need to attack, just their aura alone could crush him to death. His biggest wish in the past was to step on this sect under his feet, step on it to the death. Who knows if he would be able to fulfill his wish in this life. He also thought that if his father's face was useful, he would be able to join the Soaring Cloud sect. What should he do? Go with the flow or be more stubborn? What awaited him outside was a huge storm. It felt good to have a large sect as his backing. He had been eyeing the 10,000 years' worth of martial arts and spells of the Soaring Cloud sect. Before he got the book of Ian Extreme Life, he was planning to sneak into the Soaring Cloud sect book hiding cave. At most, if he was unhappy, he would betray the sect. Anyways, those few old fellows couldn't do anything to him. When Chu Shui heard that, she felt weird, turning around and looking at him. Then, she shook her head. Who knew that at this moment, Zhong Shou's mind was filled with thoughts that would make the Soaring Cloud sect disciples want to rip him into pieces. When Yin Yang and the others drove over, it was still raining heavily. However, near Pill Spirit Mountain, it was clear and sunny. The few of them walked up the stairs, and in just a moment they were outside of the mountain gate, only to see that below the giant stone pillar, there were 4 to 5 Taoists. Each of them had their bodies straightened, standing at the 2 sides of the stone pillar. Before Zhong Shou and the others got close, a square-faced Taoist walked out and hollered, "Who are you?" Today is the day of the Soaring Cloud sect's inner sect disciples. The outer sect test will wait 3 days later, when the rain stops. If there is nothing else, you all can leave. Yin Yang hurriedly stopped in his tracks, bowing solemnly. Gantian Mountain Yin Yang is here on orders from the ruler to visit the first seat of your sect's Pill Spirit Mountain. He wants to let my young master join the Soaring Cloud sect. Whilst he spoke, Yin Yang took out a red token from his hand and held it in front of him. This is the Soaring Cloud Vermilion token. Zhong Shou's pupils constricted, and he was enlightened. No wonder his father and Yin Yang had the confidence to let him join the Soaring Cloud sect. To be able to have this Soaring Cloud Vermilion token, the Soaring Cloud sect was indebted to them. With this token, one could request something from the Soaring Cloud sect at any time. Naturally, there were different degrees of kindness, and the holder of the token could only ask for something similar. Looking at the words Soaring Cloud on the token, there was a golden line. It seemed like his father or ancestor had helped the Soaring Cloud sect a lot. The square-faced Taoist was also surprised, but he hesitated slightly, looking at Zhong Shou and nodding his head slightly. So it is the Sky Fox Zhong family. Then this is the Gantian Mountain Prince, right? Since it is a high-grade soaring cloud vermilion token, not to mention taking him in as a disciple, even if he joined the first seat, it would be fine. I am Huang Yi, a 5th-generation disciple of the Soaring Cloud sect. The 3 of you can follow me. After Huang Yi said that, he raised his hand, and a cloud-shaped magical artifact flew out, hanging in midair. Yin Yang and Chu Shui didn't say anything, each stepping onto the cloud. Zhong Shou followed behind, taking large strides up. The 3 of you, please stand firm. Huang Yi reminded him. He formed a hand seal with both hands and chanted an incantation. Then, he said the word rise. The cloud below instantly rose into the air, slowly flying towards the peak of the mountain. The speed of the cloud wasn't fast, but it was much faster than walking. In just a moment they were already halfway up the mountain. This was the first time Chu Shui rode such a Spirit Master magical artifact. She stepped on it and then said enviously, "This Taoist Huang Yi is only a 5th-generation disciple of the Soaring Cloud sect. He is so young, not much older than me, but he can already ride a magical artifact in the air. I wonder when Shui will be able to have such achievements." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.